I spent years working double shifts as a bookkeeper to fund my husband's corporate ascent, making myself invisible so he could shine. But at his elite company dinner, he looked at my thrift store dress and warned me not to embarrass him. He thought I was just his stepping stone. But then his billionaire boss saw my face, stood up shaking, and whispered that he had searched 27 years for me. What my husband did not know was that I was about to discover he had known my secret all along, and his entire career was built on my stolen identity. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. My name is Abigail Preston. I am 29 years old, and I work as a bookkeeper. Right now, I am sitting in the driver's seat of my freezing 2004 Honda Civic in the darkest corner of the Oakwood Country Club parking lot. The heater broke 3 winters ago. I can see my own breath pluming in the cold December air. In my right hand, I am holding an empty plastic water bottle by the stem, practicing how to hold it like a crystal wine glass. I adjust my fingers. I practice a pleasant, empty smile in the rearview mirror. I am practicing because my husband Trent told me I needed to practice. "Just blend in, Abigail," he had said to me this morning while adjusting his silk tie. These people are in a completely different league. Do not talk about your job. Do not talk about our finances. Do not embarrass me tonight. So I am sitting in my freezing car practicing how to be perfectly invisible. Trent went inside an hour ago to mingle with the senior partners. He told me to wait in the car until exactly 8 o'clock, so I would not interrupt his networking time. I looked down at my shoes. They are 5 years old. The soles are worn thin, and I used a black marker this morning to color over the scuff marks on the toes. I pull my thin wool coat tighter around my shoulders. If you are wondering why a grown woman is sitting in a freezing car wearing worn-out shoes while her husband drinks top-shelf liquor inside a warm country club, the answer is simple. The answer is math. I am a bookkeeper. I understand numbers better than I understand people. And for the past 6 years, my entire life was a grueling spreadsheet dedicated entirely to Trent and his potential. When we met in our early 20s, Trent had big dreams, but absolutely no money. He wanted to go to Northwestern University for his Master of Business Administration. He told me it was his ticket to the top and our ticket to a beautiful future. I loved him. I believed in him. I believe that when you love someone, you sacrifice for them. You become the foundation they build their dreams upon. I took a job managing accounts for a property firm that handled local strip malls. I worked 60-hour weeks under flickering fluorescent lights. My days smelled like stale coffee and old receipt paper. I typed numbers until my wrists burned and my vision blurred. I did not just pay our rent and our grocery bills. I paid the grueling $85,000 for his tuition. When Trent insisted he needed to take his classmates out to expensive dinners to build his network, I paid the $20,000 in credit card debt he racked up. I paid every single cent. For 6 years, I did not buy myself a single new piece of clothing. I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror. I skipped lunches to save $20 a week. I poured my youth, my energy, and my entire financial future into his ambition. Whenever I was exhausted to the point of tears, Trent would kiss my forehead and tell me it would all be worth it. He promised me that once he landed a top-tier job, I would never have to worry again. We would be partners in everything. 3 months ago, he finally got the call. He landed a junior executive role at Ashford Capital. It is one of the most prestigious investment firms in the city. The starting salary was more than I had made in the last 3 years combined. I remember driving home that day feeling lighter than air. I stopped at the grocery store and bought a $20 bottle of champagne to celebrate. I thought our years of struggling were finally over. I thought my relentless sacrifice had finally paid off, and we could begin our real life together. I set the glasses on our small kitchen table. Trent walked through the door. I popped the cork and poured the champagne, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Trent looked at the cheap bottle and scoffed. He did not hug me. He did not thank me. He walked past me into the living room and told me to sit down. We needed to have a serious talk about our future. He sat across from me and explained that getting the job was only the first step. He told me that Ashford Capital was a shark tank filled with men from old money and elite backgrounds. If he wanted to survive and climb the corporate ladder, he needed to look the part. He needed an immediate lifestyle upgrade. He handed me a list he had typed out. It included 3 custom-tailored suits at $2,000 each. It included a $10,000 initiation fee for a premier golf club in the suburbs. It included a lease for a luxury sedan. I stared at the piece of paper in absolute disbelief. I told him we had absolutely zero savings. I reminded him that I had just drained our checking account to pay off the last of his student credit card debt. I told him I was completely exhausted and could not squeeze another penny out of my current salary. Trent did not blink. His eyes were cold and calculating. He told me that an investment is only good if you follow it all the way through to the end. He said if he showed up to the Ashford Capital offices wearing off-the-rack suits and driving a beat-up car, they would never respect him. He would be passed over for promotions. He would fail. "Do you want me to fail after everything we put into this?" he asked me. His voice was sharp, dripping with condescension. "You are a bookkeeper, Abigail. You should understand the concept of capital expenditure. We need this money now," I cried. I told him my hands were cramping so badly from typing that I had to ice them every night. I told him I was working 60 hours a week, and I physically could not take on any more hours at my firm. Trent did not comfort me. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out another piece of paper. He slid it across the kitchen table. It was a printout for a weekend bookkeeping job at a high-volume auto dealership across town. It was 20 hours of work covering Saturday and Sunday. "It is essential for networking, Abigail," he said smoothly. "The other executives play golf every weekend. I have to be on that course with them. I need you to take this weekend job just for a year, just until my bonus kicks in. It is for our future." I looked at the man I had married, the man I had bankrolled. He was asking me to work 7 days a week, 80 hours total, so he could walk around a manicured golf course pretending to be a millionaire. He used my love against me. He used my fear of ruining our future against me. So I took the weekend job. I worked Monday through Friday at the strip mall property firm and Saturday and Sunday at the auto dealership. I woke up at 5 in the morning every single day. I stopped seeing my friends. I stopped having a life. I existed solely to generate cash. And Trent took that cash and transformed himself. He bought the $2,000 suits. He bought silk ties and imported leather shoes. He paid the golf club initiation fee. He started drinking top-shelf scotch and talking about stock portfolios. He built a shining, perfect corporate armor, and he built it entirely on my broken back. As Trent upgraded his life, he began to downgrade me. The more he looked like an elite executive, the more embarrassed he became of the woman paying for it. That brings me back to tonight, sitting in this freezing car holding a plastic water bottle. Trent is inside the Oakwood Country Club, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. I am outside wearing a dress he bought for me from a discount rack yesterday. He picked it out specifically because it was a dull gray color. He told me it would help me blend into the background. I checked the clock on my dashboard. It is exactly 8 o'clock. My hands are numb from the cold. I drop the plastic water bottle onto the passenger seat. I check my plain gray dress and push open the heavy car door. The wind bites through my thin coat as I walk across the sprawling parking lot toward the glowing lights of the country club. I am walking into a room full of millionaires. I am walking in to stand quietly beside my husband and smile while he ignores me. I am doing exactly what I have been trained to do for 6 years. I am preparing to be invisible. But what Trent does not know, and what I do not know yet, is that my days of being invisible are about to end tonight. I am about to walk into that dining room, and everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and my own life is going to be ripped apart. I was paying for a life I was no longer allowed to participate in. As Trent transformed into the perfect corporate executive, he began to systematically erase me from the picture. At first it happened slowly. A Friday night dinner with the senior partners here, a weekend charity golf tournament there. I would sit at our small kitchen table rubbing my aching wrists after a 14-hour double shift eating reheated pasta while he rubbed elbows with the city elite. Whenever I asked to come along, he had an excuse ready. He would adjust his heavy gold cufflinks, the very ones I bought him for his promotion, and give me a patronizing smile. He would tell me that spouses were not invited to these things. He said it was just shop talk, and I would be bored to tears anyway. I believed him because I was simply too tired to question it. When you are surviving on 4 hours of sleep and burning through your 20s just to keep the lights on, you do not have the energy to argue. You just want to close your eyes. But the truth has a funny way of making itself known. It was a late Thursday evening in October. Trent had called to say he was attending a mandatory networking mixer at a rooftop lounge downtown. He told me to go to sleep and not wait up. I was sitting on our worn-out couch rubbing a cheap lotion into my hands, trying to ease the cramps from typing all day. I picked up my phone and opened social media just to mindlessly scroll. A woman named Caroline had popped up on my suggested friends list. I recognized her face from a brief encounter we had at a coffee shop months ago. She was married to one of the senior analysts at Ashford Capital. I clicked on her profile. The very first post was a gallery of photos uploaded just an hour earlier. The caption read, "Celebrating another record-breaking quarter with the Ashford family." My breath caught in my chest. There was Trent. He was standing in the center of the frame holding a crystal glass of scotch, laughing brightly. And standing right next to him was Caroline and 4 other women. They were wives. They were dressed in stunning cocktail attire, dripping in understated jewelry. The kind of women who looked like they had never scrubbed a floor or worried about a late electric bill. Trent had his arm resting casually on the back of an empty chair. An empty chair that should have belonged to me. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I swiped through the rest of the album. The wives were everywhere. They were clinking glasses. They were laughing with the firm partners. They were clearly an integral part of the company culture. Spouses were not forbidden. They were expected. I was the only one missing. A cold, heavy weight settled into my stomach. It was not just the lie that hurt. It was the absolute ease with which he had told it. He had looked me in the eye that morning, kissed my cheek, and fed me a fabricated story so he would not have to be seen with the woman funding his entire existence. I stayed awake on this couch until 2 a.m. When the front door finally clicked open, Trent walked in humming a soft tune. He smelled of expensive cigars and high-end cologne. He stopped dead when he saw me sitting in the dark. He asked what I was doing up so late. I did not yell. I just turned my phone screen toward him, displaying the group photo. I asked him why Caroline and the other wives were there. I asked him why he told me spouses were not invited. I watched his face carefully, expecting to see panic or guilt, or at least an apology. Instead, he let out a long, exasperated sigh, like a parent dealing with a difficult toddler. He tossed his keys onto the counter and loosened his silk tie. He walked over and looked down at me. "You want the truth, Abigail?" he asked, his voice dripping with frustration. "The truth is that you would not fit in. These people come from old money. They grew up summering in the Hamptons and attending Ivy League schools. Look at you." He gestured toward me. I was wearing oversized sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. My hair was tied back with a cheap elastic. My hands were stained with black ink from the ledger books. "You are exhausted all the time," he continued. "You talk about grocery budgets and weekend shifts. You do not know how to mingle with these people. If I bring you to these events, they will judge me. They will think I am not one of them. I am protecting my career, and I am protecting you from being embarrassed." I sat there completely paralyzed. I had worked myself into the ground to build the pedestal he was standing on, and now he was looking down from it, telling me I was too dirty to climb up beside him. He twisted the narrative so perfectly. He made it sound like my exhaustion was a personal failing instead of a direct result of carrying his financial burdens. The worst part was that I believed him. I absorbed his cruel words because I thought that was what a supportive wife was supposed to do. I swallowed the humiliation. I told myself that he was right. I was just a tired bookkeeper. I did not know anything about their world. I apologized to him for staying up late and starting a fight. I apologized to the man who was bleeding me dry. For the next 2 months, I stayed completely out of sight. I worked my double shifts. I paid his credit card bills. I kept the apartment clean and his suits perfectly pressed. I became a ghost haunting my own marriage. But then the invitations went out for the Ashford Capital Annual Founders Dinner. It was the most important corporate event of the year. Julian Ashford, the billionaire founder of the firm, hosted it personally. And according to the heavy cream cardstock invitation that arrived in our mail, it was strictly mandatory for all executives to attend with their spouses. Trent panicked. I watched him pace around our living room for 3 days, trying to figure out a way to go alone. He even considered telling his boss I had fallen violently ill. But the firm placed a massive emphasis on family values. Showing up to the founders' dinner without a wife was a massive red flag for the senior partners. He had no choice. He had to take me. The week before the dinner, Trent instituted a strict regime of rules. He sat me down with a notepad and dictated exactly how I was to behave. Rule number 1, he said, tapping his pen on the table. You speak only when you are directly spoken to. Do not initiate conversations with the partners. Rule number 2. If someone asks what you do for a living, you tell them you manage private accounts for small businesses. Do not use the word bookkeeper. It sounds too blue-collar. Make it sound like wealth management. Rule number 3. You do not drink more than 1 glass of wine. You do not talk about the weather. You do not mention my student loans or your weekend job at the auto dealership. You just smile and agree with whatever I say. I wrote it all down. I nodded. I was terrified of ruining his big night. I wanted to prove to him that I could fit into his world. I told him I would go to the department store on my lunch break and find a nice dress, something elegant and appropriate. Trent shook his head. He reached into a shopping bag he had brought home from work and pulled out a garment bag. I handled it, he said, handing it to me. I found something perfect for you. I unzipped the bag. Inside was a dress. It was a shapeless, drab gray fabric that felt stiff and cheap to the touch. It had a high neckline and long sleeves. It looked like a uniform from a dreary dystopian novel. It was clearly bought from a discount rack entirely devoid of style or grace. It was at least 1 size too big. I held it up against my body. I looked at Trent, feeling a sharp sting behind my eyes. I asked him if he really wanted me to wear this. I told him it looked like a potato sack. It is modest, he said sharply. It is conservative. The women at this dinner will be wearing designer gowns that cost $5,000. If you try to dress up and compete with them, you will just look cheap and desperate. This dress is safe. It will help you blend into the background. Nobody will notice you, and that is exactly what we need. Do not argue with me on this, Abigail. Just wear the dress. He wanted to erase me. He could not leave me at home, so he was going to wrap me in dull gray fabric and turn me into a shadow. He wanted me to be a piece of furniture standing quietly by his side, reflecting no light, drawing no attention. I took the dress into the bedroom and hung it on the back of the door. I stared at it for a long time. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent crunching numbers, staring at spreadsheets, until my head pounded just so he could afford to stand in rooms like the one we were about to enter. I had traded my youth for his success, and my reward was a gray sack and an order to remain invisible. That is how I ended up here tonight. That is how I ended up sitting in the driver's seat of my freezing 2004 Honda Civic in the darkest corner of the Oakwood Country Club parking lot. I am wearing the gray dress. It scratches against my skin. It hangs loosely over my shoulders, masking my shape entirely. I am holding the empty plastic water bottle by the stem, practicing my grip, because Trent told me that poor people hold wine glasses by the bowl, and he will not let me embarrass him. I am a shadow preparing to walk into a room of blinding light. But as I push open the car door and step out into the freezing December wind, I traced the outline of the silver locket hidden beneath the high collar of this awful dress. It was the only thing my adoptive mother gave me before she died. She told me it was with me when I was found. It is the only real piece of identity I have left. I take a deep breath. I start walking toward the grand entrance of the country club. I am ready to play the role of the silent, invisible wife. I have no idea that the moment I walk through those mahogany doors, the shadow Trent forced me into is going to be shattered forever. The valet at the Oakwood Country Club did not know what to do with my 2004 Honda Civic. When I pulled up to the grand portico bordered by towering oak trees and flickering gas lanterns, the young man in a crisp white uniform hesitated. He looked from the dented front bumper to my face with polite but obvious confusion. Behind me, a long line of imported luxury vehicles purred quietly waiting their turn. Trent was already unbuckling his seatbelt before the car even came to a complete stop. He threw the keys at the valet and scanned the area, frantically checking to see if any senior partners from Ashford Capital had witnessed our arrival. He grabbed my elbow with a tight, bruising grip and pulled me toward the massive double doors before I could even retrieve my purse from the floorboard. The moment we stepped into the main lobby, the sheer weight of generational wealth pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The air smelled of fresh orchids, roasted meats, and expensive heavy perfumes. A string quartet played a classical piece somewhere out of sight, but the music was nearly drowned out by the hum of wealthy, confident voices. Women glided past us in sweeping gowns that cost more than my annual grocery budget. Men stood in tight circles wearing bespoke tuxedos, holding cut crystal glasses filled with amber liquor. I smoothed my hands down the stiff, cheap fabric of the gray dress Trent had forced me to wear. The harsh material scratched against my collarbone. I felt like an intruder who had accidentally wandered into a palace and was waiting to be thrown out by security. Trent did not offer me his arm. He walked half a step ahead of me, his eyes scanning the crowded foyer for people who mattered. He spotted a group of men standing near a towering, intricate ice sculpture. His entire posture changed instantly. His shoulders squared, his smile grew wide and bright, and he looked like a completely different person. The weary, aggressive man from our kitchen disappeared, replaced by a charming, ambitious corporate shark. He leaned back toward me and lowered his voice to a harsh, demanding whisper. "Remember what we talked about, Abigail. Keep your mouth shut today. Do not speak unless spoken to. And do not do anything to draw attention to yourself." He steered me away from the grand centerpieces and the glittering chandeliers, guiding me toward the very back of the massive dining room. We wove through tables draped in heavy silk and adorned with towering floral arrangements. The further back we went, the less impressive the tables became. Finally, he stopped at a small, isolated table situated right next to the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. Waiters rushed in and out, carrying massive silver trays of champagne and hot appetizers. The noise of clattering dishes and shouting chefs bled through the wooden doors every single time they swung open. Trent pulled out a chair that faced the blank wall, forcing me to turn my back to the rest of the room. "Sit right here," he instructed, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. "I have to go say hello to the managing directors and shake some hands. Do not wander around. Do not try to mingle. I will come get you when it is time for dinner to be served." Before I could even nod or offer a word of agreement, he turned on his heel and disappeared into the sea of silk and tailored wool. I sat down slowly in the stiff wooden chair. A waiter bumped my shoulder as he rushed out of the kitchen, offering a hurried, generic apology before vanishing into the crowd. I folded my hands tightly in my lap and turned my head just enough to watch my husband across the room. He was laughing loudly at a joke told by an older man with silver hair. He looked completely at ease. He belonged here, or at least he had successfully purchased the illusion of belonging here by using the marrow of my bones. I sat in that dark corner and thought about the massive spreadsheets waiting on my laptop back in our small apartment. I thought about the grueling Sunday shifts at the auto dealership, where my back ached so badly I had to take painkillers just to stand up straight. I had built that man. I had funded every single thread of that beautiful suit he was wearing. My reward for 6 years of total financial sacrifice was being shoved into a dark, noisy corner wearing a dress designed to humiliate me. I sat there alone for 45 minutes. Nobody spoke to me. I sipped from a glass of tap water because Trent had explicitly warned me not to drink the expensive wine. I tried to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. But the gray dress which Trent claimed would act as camouflage had the exact opposite effect. In a room full of vibrant jewel tones and glittering diamonds, my drab, oversized outfit made me stick out horribly. I noticed a group of 3 women approaching my table. They were holding tall crystal flutes of champagne and laughing softly together. The woman in the center had perfectly styled blonde hair and was wearing a breathtaking emerald green gown that caught the light with every step. I recognized her immediately from the social media photos I had found weeks ago. Her name was Cassandra, and her husband was a highly influential senior vice president at the firm. Cassandra stopped a few feet from my table and looked me up and down. Her gaze was deliberate and dissecting. Her eyes traveled slowly from the scuffed toes of my black shoes to the clumsy hem of my gray dress, and finally settled on my bare, makeup-free face. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" she asked. Her tone was dripping with thick, fake sympathy. The 2 women beside her giggled softly, hiding their smiles behind their manicured hands. I cleared my throat and sat up straighter, trying desperately to remember my manners. "No," I said, my voice sounding much smaller than I wanted it to. "I am Abigail Preston. My husband is Trent Preston. He just joined the firm as a junior executive." Cassandra raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Trent," she repeated, acting as if she had to search her memory for the name. "Oh yes, the new hire with the very aggressive ambition. We have all heard quite a bit about Trent." She took a slow, elegant sip of her champagne, never taking her sharp eyes off me. "It is so fascinating that he decided to bring you tonight. Usually the new men try to put their best foot forward when they meet the founder's circle." I felt a hot rush of blood flood my cheeks. I did not know how to respond to such blatant, calculated cruelty. I had spent my entire adult life dealing with numbers, tax codes, and balancing ledgers, not the venomous social games of the corporate elite. "Where on earth did you find that dress?" Cassandra continued gesturing vaguely at my chest with her free hand. "Did you sew it yourself out of old curtains? It is incredibly brave of you to wear something so remarkably hideous to a formal black tie event. I really must applaud your total lack of shame." I opened my mouth to defend myself to tell her that I did not choose this outfit, but before I could form a single sentence, a familiar voice cut through the tense air. "Is there a problem here?" It was Trent. He walked up to the table holding a fresh glass of expensive scotch. Beside him stood an older, distinguished executive who looked exactly like Cassandra. It was her powerful husband. Trent looked from my flushed face to Cassandra, and his easy corporate smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He quickly processed the dynamic of the conversation. Cassandra turned to Trent and offered a dazzling, welcoming smile. "Trent, darling, we were just admiring your wife's bold fashion choices. It is so refreshing to see someone completely abandon the concept of good taste. It takes real courage to step out of the house looking like that." I looked up at my husband. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I waited for him to do the right thing. I waited for him to put his arm around my shoulder to tell this cruel woman to step away, to say that I was the reason he was standing in this magnificent room. I waited for the man I had sacrificed my entire youth for to protect me. Trent looked at Cassandra. He looked at her senior vice president husband. Then he looked down at me, sitting completely defenseless in the chair by the swinging kitchen doors. And Trent laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh designed entirely to appease the wealthy people standing in front of him. "I know," he said, shaking his head while looking at me with pure dismissal. "I tried to tell her to buy something nice for tonight, but you know how it is. You can take the girl out of the suburbs, but you can never teach her class. She is my little charity project." Cassandra laughed brightly, tossing her head back, and her husband chuckled loudly, clapping Trent on the shoulder. "Good man, Trent," the executive said, his voice booming with approval. "You have a great sense of humor and you do not take things too seriously. You will go very far here." The group turned and walked away toward the main ballroom, leaving me completely shattered. Trent did not even look at me. He did not offer a silent apology. He just turned on his heel and eagerly followed them back into the crowd, desperate to soak up more of their validation. I sat perfectly still, staring at the empty space where my husband had just stood. The noise of the kitchen and the chatter of the ballroom faded into a dull ringing in my ears. I felt completely hollowed out. I reached up with trembling fingers and gripped the small silver locket resting against my chest. It was cold to the touch. My adoptive mother gave it to me on her deathbed when I was a teenager. She told me I was wearing it the day I was placed in the foster system as a baby. It was the only tangible connection I had to my biological past, to a family I had never known. I squeezed the intricate silver metal so hard it dug painfully into my palm. I closed my eyes and prayed for the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I thought this was the lowest moment of my life. I thought the pain in my chest could not possibly get any worse. I had absolutely no idea that the real shock of the evening was only moments away, and that my simple silver locket was about to change the trajectory of my entire existence. A hush fell over the grand dining room of the Oakwood Country Club. The gentle clinking of crystal and silver dissolved into complete silence as the heavy velvet curtains near the main stage parted. Julian Ashford stepped up to the mahogany podium. He was 72 years old, but he moved with the steady, undeniable power of a man who owned everything his eyes touched. His silver hair was perfectly swept back, and his bespoke tuxedo fit him like modern armor. I sat frozen in my stiff wooden chair near the kitchen doors, my fingers still wrapped tightly around the cold silver locket at my throat. Trent hurried over from the crowd of executives and quickly slid into the empty seat beside me. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch, and hissed at me to sit up straight and look presentable. He whispered that this was the most important speech of the year, and I was not to breathe too loudly. I obeyed. I watched the billionaire adjust the microphone. Julian spoke about the concept of legacy. He talked about building a foundation that would outlast our mortal lives. He spoke of family bloodlines and the sacred duty of passing down an empire to the next generation. It was a beautiful speech, but I felt completely disconnected from his words. I had no legacy. I was a girl raised in the foster system, a tired bookkeeper who had spent her entire youth paying off her husband's debts. My only inheritance was the cheap gray dress I was currently wearing and the tarnished silver locket pressing against my collarbone. Thunderous applause erupted as Julian Ashford concluded his remarks and stepped down from the elevated stage. The room buzzed with renewed energy. Waiters rushed back onto the floor carrying fresh trays of champagne. Julian began making his way through the sea of decorated tables. He was shaking hands, nodding to senior partners and accepting their lavish praise. Trent watched him approach like a predator tracking a meal. His eyes were wide with desperate ambition. He aggressively smoothed the lapels of his suit and nudged my ribs hard with his elbow. "Stand up, Abigail," he commanded under his breath. "He is coming this way. I will introduce myself, and you will just smile and keep your mouth shut. Do you understand me?" I nodded blindly, pushing my chair back and rising to my feet. The rough fabric of my dress felt heavy and awkward. I kept my head slightly bowed, trying to fulfill my assigned role as a background prop. Julian moved closer. He navigated past a table of laughing women in sparkling gowns, including the cruel wives who had mocked me earlier. Trent puffed out his chest and took a bold step forward, eagerly extending his right hand toward his boss. "Mr. Ashford." Sir Trent projected his voice using that fake hearty tone he reserved for people he wanted to impress. "I am Trent Preston, your new junior executive. It was a brilliant speech, sir. Simply brilliant." Julian did not take Trent's outstretched hand. In fact, Julian did not even look at him. The billionaire froze mid-step just 3 feet away from our table. The genial, polite smile vanished entirely from his weathered face. The surrounding guests noticed the abrupt change in his demeanor. The lively conversations nearby instantly died down. A heavy, suffocating tension dropped over our corner of the ballroom. I slowly raised my head, feeling the sudden silence. Julian Ashford was staring directly at me. He was not looking at my cheap gray dress or my scuffed shoes. He was staring at my face with an intensity that made the air feel thin. His eyes searched my features, tracing the line of my jaw, the shape of my nose, the color of my eyes. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk out of a fog. Then his gaze dropped slightly lower. He looked at the base of my throat where my fingers were still nervously clutching the silver locket. I saw his entire body flinch. His broad shoulders trembled. A sharp, ragged gasp escaped his lips, cutting through the absolute quiet of the room. Trent let out an uncomfortable, nervous chuckle, entirely misreading the situation. He tried to physically block Julian from looking at me by stepping directly into his line of sight. Sir Trent stammered, his voice dripping with sudden embarrassment. "Please excuse my wife. She is not used to these kinds of formal events. I told her to dress appropriately, but she insisted on wearing this. She is just a simple bookkeeper. I am so sorry if she's bothering you." Julian Ashford lifted his hand and silenced Trent with a single sharp, dismissive gesture. He did not say a word to my husband. He stepped around Trent as if he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. He closed the distance between us until he was standing right in front of me. I could see the moisture gathering in his sharp blue eyes. I could see his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo jacket. The billionaire slowly reached out his right hand. His fingers were shaking uncontrollably. He did not touch me, but he brought his hand close to the silver locket resting against my chest. His lips parted, and he spoke in a voice so quiet, so fragile, it felt entirely separate from the powerful man who had just addressed the ballroom. "I searched 27 years for you." The words slammed into my chest like a physical blow. I could not comprehend what I was hearing. I stared up into his face, totally paralyzed. "What did you say?" I whispered. Behind me, Trent let out a frantic, panicked sound. "Mr. Ashford, I assure you, there is some sort of misunderstanding," Trent pleaded, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising grip. "We are leaving right now. Abigail, get your purse. We are not going to ruin Mr. Ashford's evening." I tried to pull my arm away, but Trent's fingers dug violently into my skin. He was terrified of losing his job, of losing his carefully crafted image. He tried to drag me toward the kitchen doors. Julian Ashford snapped his head up, and his eyes burned with a sudden, terrifying fury. "Take your hands off her," he commanded. His voice echoed across the room like thunder. It was an order that brooked absolutely no defiance. Trent dropped my arm, instantly taking a frightened step backward. Within seconds, two massive men in dark suits materialized from the crowd. They were Julian's personal security detail. They stepped smoothly between me and my husband, forming an impenetrable wall of broad shoulders and solid muscle. Trent's face drained of all color. He looked from the security guards to his boss, completely bewildered and terrified. "Sir, please," Trent begged, his voice cracking. "She is my wife." Julian ignored him entirely. He looked back at me, his expression softening into something raw and profoundly vulnerable. "Please come with me," he asked gently, holding out his hand. "We need to talk privately." I looked at Trent, who was silently mouthing the word "no," shaking his head frantically. But I looked back at the billionaire whose eyes held answers to questions I had carried my entire life. I placed my hand in his. The security guards flanked us instantly. Julian led me away from the kitchen doors, away from my terrified husband, and away from the gaping stares of the corporate elite. We walked down a long carpeted corridor far away from the noise of the gala. My mind was spinning wildly. Trent attempted to follow us, shouting my name, but one of the security guards turned and placed a massive hand flat against Trent's chest. "You stay here," the guard stated bluntly. "The lady goes alone." Julian guided me into a private executive study at the end of the hall. The room was lined with dark mahogany bookshelves and smelled of rich leather and aged paper. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, sealing out the music and the whispers of the country club. The sudden quiet was deafening. Julian walked over to a small crystal decanter on a side table. His hands were still trembling so badly he nearly dropped the glass as he poured water. He handed it to me. I took it, my fingers brushing against his. "Drink," he instructed softly. "You look completely pale." I took a small sip. The cool water grounded me slightly, but my heart was still hammering against my ribs. I clutched my locket again. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why did you say you were searching for me?" Julian walked slowly to the large leather chair behind the desk, but he did not sit down. He leaned heavily against the wooden frame, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. He looked at me with an ocean of grief and relief washing over his face. He told me to sit down. I collapsed into the plush chair opposite the desk. Julian began to speak. He told me a story about his only son, David. He said David was the light of his life, a brilliant young man who had fallen in love with a deeply troubled and unstable woman. They had a baby girl together, but the marriage quickly deteriorated into a toxic, bitter battle. Julian explained that when the baby was barely 2 years old, David was killed in a devastating car crash. The tragic loss broke Julian, but it also triggered a vicious, spiteful reaction from his former daughter-in-law. She hated the Ashford family. She blamed Julian for her husband's unhappiness. In a fit of pure malicious vengeance, she took the baby and completely vanished. I sat in the leather chair listening to this tragic history, feeling a strange, terrifying pull in my gut. Julian explained that he hired the best private investigators in the country. He spent millions trying to track down his missing granddaughter. But the mother had changed her own name. She had changed the baby's name, and she had moved across state lines specifically to evade detection. Then Julian said, his voice cracking, his daughter-in-law passed away from a sudden illness. With no family on record, the state authorities placed the toddler into the crowded, anonymous foster care system. Because of the fake names, the private investigators completely lost the trail. Julian stared directly into my eyes. He pointed a trembling finger at the silver pendant resting on my chest. "I had that locket custom-made by a jeweler in London," he whispered. "I gave it to my son on the day you were born. Inside there is a tiny engraving. It says, 'Forever, my shining star.'" My hands flew to the locket. My adoptive mother had told me it was the only thing I owned when she fostered me. I had never been able to open the tiny hidden clasp. I always thought it was just a broken, cheap piece of metal. Julian reached across the desk. He gently took the locket from my fingers. He pressed a minuscule hidden button on the side of the silver casing. The pendant sprang open. Inside, etched into the gleaming silver interior, were the exact words he had just spoken. "Forever, my shining star." A single tear fell down Julian's weathered cheek and splashed onto the desk. He looked at me with a love so fierce and overwhelming it took my breath away. "You are not a random bookkeeper, Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are not some burden to be hidden away in a gray dress. Your real name is Abigail Ashford. You are the daughter of my beloved David. You are my own flesh and blood. You are the sole living heir to the entire Ashford capital empire." I sat paralyzed in the heavy leather chair. The walls of the private study seemed to spin around me. The entire narrative of my life, the belief that I was a discarded, unwanted orphan, the belief that my only value was defined by how hard I could work to support Trent, was crumbling into dust. I was an Ashford. I was the heir to a fortune that spanned the globe. I thought about Trent sitting out there in the dining room, wearing the suit I had bought him, completely unaware that he had just insulted the granddaughter of the man he was trying to worship. But as the shock slowly began to recede, a much darker, more terrifying realization began to crawl up the back of my neck. Julian told me he had finally located me a year ago. He said his investigators had sent letters to my home address, letters I had never seen. I thought about Trent intercepting the mail. I thought about Trent miraculously landing a job at Ashford Capital right after those letters supposedly arrived. The fairy tale reunion was beautiful, but the sinister truth about my husband was just beginning to unspool. Julian sat heavily in the massive leather chair behind his mahogany desk. The silence in the study was absolute. It was broken only by the steady ticking of a tall grandfather clock standing in the corner. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of colliding realities. I was an Ashford. I was not a discarded burden. I was not a woman who deserved to be hidden in a cheap gray dress. But before I could even begin to process the full magnitude of my new identity, Julian leaned forward. His blue eyes searched my face. They were filled with a sudden, desperate confusion. "Abigail," he said softly. His voice was thick with unshed tears. "I need to ask you something. I need to know why you never answered my letters. Why did you tell my investigator to stop contacting you?" I blinked. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I gripped the padded arms of my chair. "Letters?" I asked. "What letters? I never received any letters from a private investigator. I never told anyone to stop contacting me." Julian looked as though I had just struck him across the face. The color drained from his cheeks. He opened the heavy top drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. He set it gently on the polished wood between us. He explained that exactly 13 months ago, his lead private investigator finally managed to track down the sealed adoption records. The investigator found the legal connection between my late adoptive mother and my current legal name. Julian told me that he had been so overjoyed but also so terrified of overwhelming me. He decided to make the initial contact formal and respectful to give me space to process the revelation. He sent 3 separate registered letters to my home address in the city. He explained that those letters detailed my biological history. They contained the truth about my father, David. They included a gentle, heartfelt plea to meet over coffee whenever I felt ready. Julian said he waited agonizing weeks for a reply. He checked his mail every single day, hoping for a sign that his granddaughter wanted to know him. And then a response finally arrived. Julian opened the manila folder and pushed a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a typed letter, supposedly signed by me. The letter stated coldly that I knew all about my past. It claimed that I had absolutely no interest in reconnecting with the Ashford family. It ended with a harsh legal threat stating that any further attempts to contact me would be met with a harassment lawsuit. I stared at the paper on the desk. My stomach twisted into a violent, painful knot. I reached out with trembling fingers and pulled the letter closer. There was the typed message. It bore my name at the bottom, but the signature was absolutely not mine. It was a highly practiced, careful imitation of my handwriting. But as a professional bookkeeper, I spend my entire life looking at signatures, verifying documents, and auditing financial records. I know the unique pressure points of a pen stroke. I knew immediately who had penned this forgery. Trent. The name echoed in my mind like a heavy iron bell. I looked up at Julian. I told him that I had never seen these letters in my life. I told him I never wrote that horrible response. I explained that my husband was the one who checked the mail every single afternoon. He was the one who sorted our bills. He was the one who held the only key to our locked, secure mailbox down in the lobby of our apartment building. As the words left my mouth, a horrifying timeline began to construct itself in my brain. My forensic accounting background kicked in. I started organizing the events of the past year into a brutal logical sequence. 13 months ago, the investigator sent the first letter. Trent intercepted it. He opened it, and he read the truth about his exhausted, overworked wife. He discovered that the woman he was bleeding dry to pay his massive credit card debts was actually the sole blood heir to a billionaire corporate empire. And he did not tell me. He kept it a secret from his own wife. But the realization grew darker. He did not just keep it a secret. He actively weaponized it. My breathing grew shallow. "Mr. Ashford," I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice from shaking, "when exactly did Trent apply for his job at your firm?" Julian frowned clearly, trying to follow my rapid train of thought. "He did not apply through the standard corporate channels, Abigail. It was highly unusual. About 12 months ago, your husband managed to corner our head of human resources at a charity luncheon. He pitched himself aggressively. He knew intimate, highly confidential details about our internal restructuring. He knew things that were not public knowledge. We were impressed by his initiative and his insider knowledge. We actually created the junior executive role specifically for him. The room spun around me. The puzzle pieces locked together with a sickening crunch. A week after Trent intercepted the private investigator's letter, he miraculously shifted his entire career focus. He targeted Ashford Capital. He used the confidential family information he found in those intercepted letters to infiltrate Julian's company. He embedded himself into the very firm that belonged to my biological grandfather. He did not earn that high-paying job through hard work or brilliance. He stole his way in using my stolen identity as a secret key to open the door. The sheer scale of his calculated betrayal was suffocating. Trent had forced me to work exhausting double shifts at the auto dealership. He made me pay for his $2,000 luxury suits so he could rub elbows with the grandfather he had deliberately hidden from me. He had dressed me in a cheap gray potato sack tonight and told me to blend into the background of a country club that by all rights I should have owned. He was playing a long, malicious game, and I was just a blind pawn moving on his board. I stood up from the leather chair. The initial shock was completely gone. In its place, a cold, crystalline anger began to take root in my chest. It was the kind of anger that sharpens your vision and slows your heart rate. I was no longer the timid, obedient wife shrinking in the dark corner of a ballroom. I was a forensic bookkeeper staring at a massive, fraudulent ledger, and I was going to tear his entire operation apart line by line. Julian stood up with me. His expression hardened into stone as he realized exactly what my husband had done. He reached for his phone. He offered to call his security team immediately. He offered to have Trent physically thrown out of the country club. He offered to call the police and have him arrested for mail tampering and fraud. "No," I said. My voice was surprisingly calm and commanding. "If you confront him now, he will deny it. He will play the victim. He will spin a story about trying to protect me. He will run straight home and destroy the rest of the evidence. I know exactly how my husband operates. I need to get back to our apartment before he does. I need to find whatever else he is hiding in that house." Julian nodded slowly. He understood the strategic necessity of my plan. He picked up his desk phone and summoned his personal head of security. He instructed the massive man to drive me safely to my apartment in a private car. He told the guard to wait right outside my door in case I needed protection. Julian promised me he would keep Trent occupied at the gala for at least 2 more hours. He would introduce Trent to the board of directors. He would trap him in endless corporate conversations. He would feed his massive ego to ensure he did not leave the country club early. I thanked my grandfather. It felt surreal to even think that word. But there was absolutely no time to dwell on the emotional weight of our reunion. I slipped out the back exit of the country club, escorted by the towering security guard. I left the terrible gray dress hanging on my shoulders, but I walked with a totally different posture. I was walking with absolute purpose. The drive back to our cramped apartment took 30 tense minutes. The rain lashed against the tinted windows of the luxury town car. I sat in the back seat running through a mental inventory of our home. Trent was an incredibly meticulous man. He was arrogant, but he was highly organized. If he had intercepted my mail and forged my signature, he would not have thrown the physical evidence away. He would have kept it as leverage. He would have hidden it in the one place I was expressly forbidden to go. The security guard parked the sleek black vehicle down the street from my building. He told me he would be watching the main entrance and to text him immediately if I needed him to come upstairs. I thanked him and hurried through the pouring rain into the shabby, dimly lit lobby of my apartment complex. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the dark, silent living room. The space smelled of Trent's expensive cologne and the cheap lemon cleaner I used to scrub the baseboards every Sunday. I walked straight into our bedroom. I reached around my back and unzipped the scratchy gray dress. I let it fall to the floor, stepping out of it like a discarded skin. I pulled on a pair of comfortable dark jeans and a plain black sweater. I tied my hair back into a tight, functional knot. I needed to move fast. I needed to be completely focused. I walked down the narrow hallway to the small spare bedroom. Trent used this room as his private home office. He always kept the door securely locked. He claimed it contained highly sensitive corporate documents from Ashford Capital, and that I was not legally permitted to enter under any circumstances. For years, I had blindly respected that boundary. I had tiptoed past this door, dusting the hallway and leaving him in peace to do his important work. Tonight, I did not tiptoe. I grasped the cold brass doorknob. It was locked tight just as I expected. But Trent was a creature of habit. I knew his routines better than he knew them himself. I knew he was secretly terrified of locking himself out of the room. I walked into the kitchen and opened the messy junk drawer next to the refrigerator. I pushed aside old takeout menus and spare batteries. My fingers brushed against a small silver key hidden inside an empty matchbox. I grabbed it and marched right back to the office door. The key slid into the lock perfectly. The mechanism clicked open with a sharp sound. I pushed the door wide open and turned on the overhead light. The office was immaculate. The large mahogany desk was completely clear of any clutter. The bookshelves were perfectly arranged by color and size. It looked exactly like the workspace of a brilliant, successful corporate executive. But I was not looking for surface-level perfection. I was a professional auditor. I knew that the real truth was never left out on the top of the desk. The real truth was always buried in the deepest, darkest drawer. I moved behind the heavy desk and knelt on the carpeted floor. There was a thick steel filing cabinet tucked into the corner shadows. The top two drawers were unlocked. They contained mundane utility bills, old tax returns, and credit card statements. The bottom drawer was different. It was secured with a separate heavy-duty metal padlock. This was where his real secrets lived. I did not have the key to the padlock, but I had something much better. I had years of suppressed frustration, and I had a solid metal paperweight sitting on the edge of the desk. I grabbed the heavy brass object. I wrapped it tightly in a small hand towel to muffle the sound. I raised my arm and struck the padlock as hard as I possibly could. Once, twice. On the third violent strike, the cheap metal latch holding the lock in place splintered and broke apart. I pulled the heavy bottom drawer open. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of manila folders. I stood up and turned on the small desk lamp, casting a harsh yellow circle of light over the documents. I fully expected to find the original letters from Julian. I expected to find solid proof of his mail tampering. But as I opened the very first folder and began to read the dense legal text, the breath was completely knocked out of my lungs. The private investigator letters were indeed there, but they were just the absolute beginning of the nightmare. Trent had not merely hidden my powerful family from me. He had used my stolen identity to construct a financial prison so terrifying and so meticulously planned that I had to trace the printed numbers 3 times just to believe my own eyes. I spread the forged documents across his pristine mahogany desk. The horrifying reality of my entire marriage lay completely bare under the bright lamplight. I realized in that quiet room that my husband had been plotting my total destruction for a very long time. I dropped the manila folders onto the polished mahogany surface of Trent's desk. My hands were perfectly steady now. The initial wave of shock had entirely burned away, leaving behind a cold and brilliant clarity. I am a bookkeeper. My entire professional life revolves around finding the missing pieces of a puzzle. I know how people try to hide their tracks when they are moving money or manipulating assets. The folders on the desk were certainly damning, but they were far too accessible. A man as meticulously arrogant as my husband would never leave his true masterpiece in a simple filing cabinet drawer. He would demand a deeper layer of security for the things that mattered most. I stepped back and scanned the small office. The room was bathed in the harsh yellow light of the desk lamp. My eyes traced the baseboards, the heavy wooden bookshelves, and finally the thick woven rug beneath the desk. I knelt back down on the floor and ran my hands over the carpet. Near the back left leg of the desk, the fibers felt slightly flattened. I gripped the edge of the heavy wooden desk and pushed it forward with all my strength. The wood groaned against the floorboards, revealing a square cut into the carpeting. I peeled the square back. Beneath it, bolted directly into the subfloor, was a heavy black steel safe with a digital keypad. I stared at the glowing green numbers. Trent was a man utterly consumed by his own accomplishments. He worshipped his own milestones more than he ever valued our marriage. I did not even bother trying our anniversary date or my birthday. I knew better. I reached out and typed in the date of his graduation from Northwestern University, the very degree I had worked double shifts for 6 years to finance. The keypad beeped a pleasant, cheerful sound. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a loud clunk. I pulled the heavy lid open. The safe smelled of stale air and expensive paper. The first thing I saw was a stack of thick cream-colored envelopes wrapped in a simple rubber band. I lifted them out and turned them over. The return address belonged to a high-end private investigation firm based in downtown Seattle. I slipped off the rubber band and opened the top letter. It was the original correspondence from Julian Ashford. The paper was heavy and expensive. The ink was a crisp, formal black. Julian had poured his heart out onto the page, explaining the tragic death of his son and his relentless 27-year search for his missing granddaughter. He begged for a simple phone call or a brief meeting over coffee. He promised he did not want to overwhelm me. He just wanted to know if I was safe and happy. I looked at the postmark stamped on the envelope. The date was exactly 13 months ago. I closed my eyes and let the timeline fall into place. 13 months ago, I was working 80-hour weeks, exhausted beyond human limits. I was leaving the apartment before the sun came up and returning long after dark. Trent was the one checking the mail every single afternoon. He was the one sorting the bills and tossing the junk mail. He held the only key to our secure lobby mailbox. He had stood in our kitchen holding this letter from a billionaire, and he had opened it. He had read the desperate plea of a grieving grandfather. He had read the undeniable proof that the tired, overworked bookkeeper he was married to was actually the sole living heir to a massive global empire. And he had said absolutely nothing. Instead of telling me the truth, Trent had recognized a golden ticket. A week after that postmark, he suddenly bought 3 new tailored suits. He claimed he needed them for a series of aggressive networking events. Now I knew the truth. He had taken the highly confidential family information from Julian's letters and used it to orchestrate a miraculous encounter with the head of human resources at Ashford Capital. He used my stolen family history to charm his way into a lucrative executive position. He had literally built his entire shiny new corporate identity on the bones of my stolen heritage. I placed the letters gently on the carpet. My hands returned to the dark interior of the safe. Beneath the letters was a thick legal packet bound with a dark blue ribbon. The cover page bore the logo of a boutique law firm located in the financial district. I untied the ribbon and flipped open the heavy cover. The bold black letters at the top of the page read, "Post-nuptial asset agreement." My brow furrowed in deep confusion. I had never spoken to a lawyer. I had never discussed a post-nuptial agreement with Trent. We had absolutely no assets to protect, except the massive mountain of debt I was paying off for him. I began to read the dense legal text. The language was incredibly aggressive and entirely one-sided. Clause 4 stated that any unexpected inheritance, sudden wealth, or newly discovered familial assets acquired by either party would immediately be classified as joint marital property. Furthermore, it stipulated that Trent would be granted the sole legal authority to manage, invest, and distribute those funds as he saw fit. But Clause 7 was the true horror. Clause 7 stated that in the event of a divorce or legal separation, Trent would be unconditionally entitled to 80% of those inherited assets, regardless of fault or circumstance. I flipped frantically to the final page of the document. There at the bottom of the thick parchment was my name, Abigail Preston. Beside my printed name was my signature in blue ink, but the signature was completely fake. I am a professional bookkeeper. I spend 40 hours a week verifying ledgers, auditing expense reports, and scrutinizing signatures on corporate checks. I know the unique pressure points of a pen stroke. I know the subtle slant of an authentic signature. The person who signed this document had tried very hard to mimic my handwriting, but they made fatal errors. The loop of the letter A was far too rigid. The tail of the letter L dragged too low. It was a masterful forgery to the untrained eye, but to me it screamed of fraud. Trent had sat in this room, forged my name on a document that effectively signed away my future billionaire inheritance, and then had it legally sealed. I looked at the notary stamp beside my forged signature. The name was Gregory Vance. I recognized the name instantly. Gregory was a sleazy independent financial consultant Trent frequently played golf with on the weekends. Trent had bribed his corrupt country club friend to illegally notarize a fraudulent document. The sheer audacity of his plan was breathtaking. Trent had known for 13 months that I was worth millions. He had dressed me in a cheap gray sack tonight and told me to blend into the background because he was buying time. He needed to solidify his position at Ashford Capital and ensure this fraudulent legal trap was entirely watertight before the truth inevitably came out. He was planning to let Julian find me eventually. But when that day came, Trent would be standing right behind me holding a legally binding contract that gave him total control over every single dollar of my birthright. I felt a wave of profound nausea wash over me, but I forced myself to keep digging. There was one more thick manila envelope sitting at the very bottom of the steel safe. I pulled it out and opened the flap. A massive stack of bank statements spilled onto the carpet. The statements were from a private wealth management bank we did not use. The accounts were listed under my name, Abigail Preston. I picked up the most recent statement and scanned the summary box at the top of the page. The balance owed was staggering. $150,000. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped through the pages with frantic precision. Trent had taken out 3 massive personal loans and 2 secret lines of credit using my Social Security number. He had weaponized the pristine credit score and the steady, reliable income history I had built over 6 years of grueling double shifts. He had used my impeccable financial standing to secure massive amounts of liquid cash. Where did the money go? I traced the routing numbers down the columns of the bank statements. The funds had been systematically siphoned out in increments of $9,000. He kept the transfers just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering any automatic fraud alerts. Every single transfer was deposited directly into an external account held by a limited liability company called Apex Consulting, LLC. Apex Consulting was the business entity Trent had set up last year. He had told me it was just a dormant shell company for his future entrepreneurial side projects. I was so exhausted from working my weekend shifts at the auto dealership that I had signed the initial formation papers without reading the operating agreement closely. I trusted my husband. I trusted that we were building a life together. But I had not built a life. I had built my own financial guillotine. Trent had structured the LLC so that he was the sole managing member with exclusive access to the bank accounts. He was deliberately taking out massive high-interest debt in my name and funneling the clean, untraceable cash into an account only he could touch. The absolute cruelty of his grand design crystallized in my mind. The post-nuptial agreement was his offensive weapon designed to steal 80% of my future Ashford inheritance. The $150,000 in fraudulent loans was his defensive insurance policy. He was building a golden parachute for himself while strapping a massive heavy anvil to my back. If I ever tried to leave him before Julian found me, I would be completely ruined. I would be crushed under a mountain of debt I could never repay on a bookkeeper's salary. And if I stayed and claimed my inheritance, he would legally confiscate 80% of the Ashford empire. He was not just a greedy man trying to ride my coattails. He was a highly calculating predator. The man I had loved, the man I had fed and clothed and financed for my entire adult life, was actively preparing to financially enslave me. He had looked at my bruised typing hands and my exhausted, tear-stained face, and he had felt absolutely nothing but opportunity. I sat on the floor of the spare bedroom, surrounded by the undeniable paper trail of his betrayal. The silence of the apartment felt incredibly heavy. The naive, loyal wife who had practiced holding a plastic water bottle in a freezing car an hour ago was dead. She had been completely erased. In her place, a cold, calculating survivor began to rise. I carefully gathered every single forged document, every intercepted letter, and every fraudulent bank statement. I arranged them into a neat, perfectly organized stack. I was going to take these papers to Julian and his elite team of corporate lawyers. We were going to trace every single stolen dollar, and we were going to build a legal case so airtight that Trent would never see the sun outside of a federal courtroom again. I locked the heavy steel safe, leaving it completely empty. I pushed the heavy mahogany desk back over the hidden floorboard, smoothing the carpet fibers down, so it looked entirely undisturbed. I walked out of the office and locked the door, slipping the tiny silver key back into the junk drawer in the kitchen. I stood in the center of the dark living room and took a long, deep breath. Trent would be coming home soon. He would be terrified, wondering what Julian and I were discussing in that private study. He would be looking for any sign that his elaborate house of cards was falling apart. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to smile. I had to play the part of the exhausted, easily manipulated bookkeeper. I had to let him believe he was still the smartest person in the room. I had to feed his arrogant ego until the very moment I decided to drop the hammer and burn his entire world to the ground. The heavy deadbolt on our apartment door clicked open at exactly 2 a.m. I was sitting on the edge of our lumpy mattress in the dark room, wearing my oversized pajamas, staring blankly at the wall. My heart was perfectly calm. The terrified, naive girl who had walked into the country club earlier that evening was gone. The woman sitting in the dark was a forensic auditor holding a mental blueprint of her husband's absolute destruction. Trent burst into the bedroom. He did not bother turning on the lights. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving under his ruined $2,000 suit. He smelled of stale scotch and profound sour fear. He stood at the foot of the bed, trying to read my face in the shadows. He looked like an animal cornered by a sudden, unexplainable noise. "What did he say to you?" Trent demanded. His voice was a harsh, frantic whisper. He grabbed the bedpost, his knuckles turning white. "What did Julian Ashford want with you in that private study, Abigail? Tell me every single word." I looked up at him. I channeled every ounce of exhaustion I possessed. I let my shoulders slump forward. I made my eyes wide and uncertain. I was about to deliver the performance of my life because the success of my entire strategy depended on his monumental arrogance. "He was just confused," I said softly, keeping my tone completely flat and submissive. "He thought I looked like someone he knew a long time ago, an old friend or something. He brought me into his office because he was having some sort of emotional moment. He offered me a glass of water and kept asking me questions about my family." Trent stepped closer. The mattress dipped under his weight as he leaned toward me. "What kind of questions?" he pressed. "What exactly did you tell him?" "I told him I was an orphan," I replied, looking down at my hands. "I told him I did not know my biological parents, and that I grew up in the foster system. I told him I was just a bookkeeper working double shifts to help pay our bills." Trent's entire body went rigid. "Did he ask for your maiden name? Did he ask for your identification?" "No," I lied smoothly. When I told him I was just a bookkeeper from a modest background, he seemed deeply disappointed. He realized he had made a mistake. He apologized for dragging me away from the party and said it was just a trick of the lighting. He had his security guard drive me home because he was embarrassed by the whole ordeal. I watched the tension drain out of Trent's body, like water rushing down an open drain. His frantic terror was instantly replaced by a wave of arrogant relief. He genuinely believed me. He believed that the billionaire founder of Ashford Capital had simply made a foolish mistake and that I, his simple, exhausted wife, was far too unintelligent to recognize anything deeper. Trent let out a long, condescending sigh and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I told you not to draw attention to yourself, Abigail," he scolded, his tone shifting effortlessly from panic to extreme irritation. "You almost ruined the most important night of my career because you stuck out like a sore thumb in that ridiculous dress. Do you have any idea how hard I had to work to smooth things over with the senior partners after you vanished? I had to invent a story about you having a sudden panic attack. You completely embarrassed me. I apologized. I looked him dead in the eye and I apologized for embarrassing him. I told him I would try to do better. I told him I just wanted him to be successful." Trent scoffed and began unbuttoning his shirt, telling me to go to sleep so I would not be late for my shift at the auto dealership the next morning. He was so blinded by his own superiority that he never even noticed the cold, dead stare I was giving his reflection in the mirror. He thought he had survived the night. He thought his master plan to steal my inheritance was completely secure. The next morning, Trent left the apartment at 7. He wore a crisp new tie and carried his leather briefcase, whistling a cheerful tune as he walked out the door. He was going to work to sit in a glass office that belonged to my biological family. The moment the lock clicked shut, I pulled out my phone. I did not go to my weekend shift at the auto dealership. I called my manager and quit on the spot. I no longer needed to scrub ledgers for minimum wage to fund the lifestyle of a corporate parasite. At 9 o'clock, a sleek black luxury vehicle pulled up to the curb outside my building. The same massive security guard from the country club stepped out and opened the rear door for me. I climbed inside, leaving my old life completely behind. We did not drive to Ashford Capital. We drove to a highly secure private legal firm located in the top tier of a downtown high-rise. Julian Ashford was waiting for me in a massive glass-walled conference room. When I walked through those double doors, Julian stood up. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with profound, deep respect. He introduced me to the 4 people sitting around the massive mahogany table. There were 2 senior corporate litigators, a wealth management director, and a veteran forensic accountant. These were the elite fixers of the Ashford Empire. They were the sharks Julian deployed when he wanted an opponent completely dismantled. Julian pulled out a chair for me at the head of the table. "Abigail," he said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder, "tell us everything." I opened the large canvas tote bag I had brought with me. I pulled out the neatly organized folders containing every single piece of evidence I had liberated from Trent's broken safe. I laid out the intercepted letters from the private investigator. I presented the fraudulent post-nuptial agreement bearing the forged signature notarized by his corrupt golf buddy. And finally, I spread out the banking statements detailing the $150,000 in secret high-interest loans Trent had unlawfully extracted using my social security number. For the next 4 hours, the room hummed with clinical aggressive precision. I sat side by side with the forensic accountant, speaking a language I had spent my entire adult life mastering. We traced every routing number, every hidden transfer, and every fractional deposit. I showed the team exactly how Trent had structured the shell company called Apex Consulting to avoid tax liabilities, while hiding the stolen cash from marital discovery. The high-priced lawyers listened to me in absolute silence, their pens flying across legal pads. They did not treat me like a victimized housewife. They treated me like a brilliant tactical commander, handing them the exact coordinates for an airstrike. But as we dug deeper into the financial records of Apex Consulting, the forensic accountant noticed a secondary pattern of outgoing wire transfers. Trent had not just parked the stolen loan money in a hidden savings account. He had actively spent it. He had moved massive chunks of the cash through a secondary holding account to mask the final destination. The accountant projected his laptop screen onto the large monitor on the wall. He managed to crack the secondary routing numbers by cross-referencing them with public property databases. The screen illuminated with 2 major purchase records that caused the entire room to fall into a heavy, suffocating silence. $75,000 had been wired as a massive cash down payment on a luxury high-rise condominium located in the ultra-exclusive Pearl District. Another $50,000 had been transferred directly to a high-end automotive dealership in the suburbs. It was a single lump sum payment for a brand new pearl white Mercedes-Benz. I stared at the screen. I was paying the rent on our tiny cramped apartment. I was driving a broken 20-year-old Honda Civic with a broken heater. I had colored my scuffed shoes with a marker just to attend his company dinner. Trent had taken $150,000 of debt in my name and bought a luxury lifestyle. But the names listed on the property deed and the vehicle registration did not belong to Trent. The name on the screen was Savannah Hayes. Julian let out a sharp breath. His jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his cheek twitched. He knew that name. He turned to me, his blue eyes burning with an intense protective fury. "Abigail," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Savannah Hayes is a 24-year-old junior analyst at Ashford Capital. She was hired 6 months ago. She works directly under Trent's supervision in the acquisitions department." The final devastating layer of my husband's betrayal settled over me like a heavy shroud of ice. Trent was not just a calculating thief. He was not just stealing my future inheritance to secure his own golden parachute. He was living a complete double life. While I was working 80 hours a week, destroying my hands and sacrificing my youth to pay off his business school debt, he was playing house with a beautiful young woman in a luxury condo funded entirely by my stolen credit. He was taking his junior analyst on romantic drives in a Mercedes-Benz that I would eventually be legally forced to pay for. He had looked at my exhaustion and felt no pity. He had looked at my loyalty and seen only a convenient cover story. He thought I was nothing more than a blind, exhausted workhorse pulling the carriage for him and his 24-year-old mistress. One of the senior litigators leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. "We have more than enough evidence to go to the federal authorities right now, Abigail. We can have him arrested for identity theft, bank fraud, and corporate embezzlement by this afternoon. We can freeze all of his assets and seize the condominium. We can lock him in a cell before the sun goes down." I looked at the glowing screen. I looked at the name of his mistress staring back at me. A deep, terrifying calm washed over my entire body. I did not want him quietly arrested on a Tuesday afternoon. I did not want him whisked away into a quiet legal process where he could hide his shame behind closed doors. Trent cared about one thing above all else. He cared about his image. He cared about the elite corporate society he had stolen his way into. He wanted to be worshipped by the wealthy and powerful. "No," I said quietly. My voice echoed in the silent conference room. "We do not call the police today. I want him to climb higher. I want him to believe he has won absolutely everything." I looked over at Julian. "Mr. Ashford, you host a massive shareholder gala at the end of the month, correct? It is the most public, heavily attended corporate event of your entire fiscal year." Julian nodded slowly. A dangerous, understanding smile began to form on the corners of his mouth. "Yes, Abigail. The entire board of directors will be there. The top investors, every senior partner, and the local financial press." "Perfect," I replied, closing the manila folder in front of me. "You are going to tell Trent that his performance has been stellar. You are going to hint that he is in line for a massive promotion to vice president. You will invite him and his junior analyst to the gala. And when he is standing on that stage, completely blinded by his own towering ego, we are going to drop the hammer. We are going to execute him in front of every single person he has ever tried to impress." The War Council agreed. The trap was officially set. I went back to my cheap apartment that night and cooked Trent his favorite dinner. I smiled as he walked through the door. I listened to him complain about his long, hard day at the office. I washed his dishes and I ironed his shirts. I played the role of the invisible fool perfectly. I knew that every passing second brought him one step closer to a humiliation so profound it would echo for the rest of his miserable life. I sat in the glass-walled conference room, watching a man in a crisp gray suit project an enlarged image of the forged post-nuptial agreement onto the digital monitor. His name was Harrison, and he was one of the most sought-after forensic document examiners in the country. My grandfather Julian had flown him in from Washington just for this morning. Harrison used a red laser pointer to trace the ink strokes of the signature that supposedly belonged to me. He explained that a person writing their own name uses muscle memory, creating smooth, fluid lines. But a person attempting to copy a signature has to draw the letters rather than write them. This creates microscopic hesitations and unnatural ink pooling at the curves. Harrison pointed to the heavy dark spot at the base of the letter A and the rigid mechanical slant of my last name. He declared with absolute professional certainty that the signature was a fraudulent imitation. Hearing an expert confirm the forgery felt like a massive weight lifting off my chest. I had known the document was fake, but having a legal authority officially invalidate it shifted the power entirely back into my hands. Catherine, the lead corporate litigator sitting beside me, calmly filed Harrison's sworn affidavit into a thick leather binder. She explained that Trent's golf buddy, the corrupt notary who had stamped the fraudulent document, was already under quiet investigation by the state licensing board. Catherine had completely nullified the post-nuptial agreement without Trent even knowing his master plan had been compromised. My inheritance was safe. My future was secure. But we were not just building a shield to protect my assets. We were forging a sword. The next phase of our counterattack required surgical financial precision. I needed to separate myself from the $150,000 in secret loans Trent had taken out using my Social Security number. Catherine brought 2 senior fraud investigators from the issuing banks directly into our secure conference room. Because Julian Ashford carried immense influence and leverage in the financial sector, the banking executives were more than eager to cooperate with our private investigation. I provided them with the time-stamped login data I had recovered from Trent's computer. The forensic accountant demonstrated exactly how Trent had bypassed the security protocols, routing the borrowed funds directly into the hidden accounts of Apex Consulting. The banking investigators worked rapidly. They initiated a hard freeze on my entire credit profile, placing severe fraud alerts across every national reporting agency. Nobody would be able to open a single line of credit in my name ever again. Then Catherine executed the most brilliant legal maneuver of the entire day. She worked with the bank fraud division to sever my identity from the illicit loans completely. Because Trent was the sole managing member of the hidden limited liability company, and because the funds were deposited exclusively into an account he entirely controlled, the banks quietly transferred the full weight of the liability directly onto his personal financial record. Trent had assumed he was insulated. He believed the debt belonged to me while the cash belonged to him. He was completely unaware that the legal trap had just snapped shut around his own ankles. He was now solely responsible for $150,000 in fraudulent bank loans, and the federal authorities were quietly building an embezzlement case that would send him to prison. The luxury downtown condo and the pearl-white Mercedes-Benz he had purchased for his 24-year-old mistress were now legally classified as assets acquired through criminal bank fraud. His entire shadow life was built on a foundation of gasoline, and Catherine had just handed me the match. While the legal team secured my financial freedom, my grandfather initiated the corporate setup. Julian understood that a man as deeply narcissistic as my husband could easily be manipulated by his own greed. Julian wanted to ensure that Trent felt utterly invincible before the final blow was struck. That afternoon, Julian summoned Trent to the executive penthouse suite at Ashford Capital. It was a massive corner office overlooking the city, a place reserved only for the highest tier of corporate power. Trent walked into the office radiating nervous excitement, desperately eager to impress the billionaire founder. Julian played the role of the benevolent mentoring boss with absolute perfection. He offered Trent a seat on the expensive leather sofa and poured him a glass of sparkling water. Julian spoke in low, measured tones, praising Trent for his unique vision and his aggressive initiative. He told my husband that Ashford Capital was looking for young, hungry executives who were not afraid to take risks. He said he had been watching Trent's performance very closely and was incredibly impressed by his trajectory. Julian fed Trent's ego page by page, validating every delusion of grandeur my husband possessed. Then Julian laid the final piece of bait. He mentioned the upcoming Ashford Capital Shareholder Gala. It was the most prestigious, heavily publicized event on the corporate calendar. Julian leaned forward and confided that he was planning to announce a massive internal restructuring during his keynote address. He looked Trent directly in the eye and hinted heavily that the firm was preparing to name a new vice president of acquisitions. Julian told Trent to make sure his calendar was completely clear for the gala, because it was going to be a night that would change his career forever. He even encouraged Trent to invite the junior analyst from his department, Savannah Hayes, claiming he wanted to see how the two of them operated as a team. Trent swallowed the bait without a single moment of hesitation. He walked out of the penthouse office believing he had conquered the world. That evening I was back in our cramped, freezing apartment, folding laundry in the small bedroom. I heard the front door slam shut. Trent practically floated down the hallway. He was buzzing with a manic, toxic energy. He did not bother to ask how my day was. He did not ask if my hands were hurting from my endless bookkeeping tasks. He simply threw his expensive leather briefcase onto the bed and began pacing around the room, running his hands through his hair in a state of wild euphoria. He looked at our modest furniture and the faded carpet with an expression of pure disgust. "I cannot wait to get out of this depressing dump," he announced, pacing back and forth. His voice was loud and sharp, dripping with newfound arrogance. He stopped and looked at me, holding a stack of his folded shirts. "You have absolutely no idea what happened today, Abigail." Julian Ashford called me into his private office. Just the two of us. He practically told me I'm going to be named the new vice president of acquisitions at the shareholder gala this weekend. I am about to step into a completely different tax bracket. I kept my expression perfectly blank. I set the folded shirts down on the mattress and offered him a polite, empty smile. "That is wonderful news, Trent," I said softly. "You have worked so hard for this." He scoffed, shaking his head as if my praise was somehow inadequate. "I have outgrown this life, Abigail," he said, stepping closer to me. His eyes were cold, stripping away any remaining pretense of affection. He looked at me, not as a wife, but as a piece of obsolete machinery he was finally preparing to discard. "You need to understand that my trajectory is moving faster than you can possibly comprehend. I am entering a world of immense power and wealth. People like Julian Ashford recognize my true value. They see exactly what I'm capable of achieving." He crossed his arms over his chest, staring down at me with absolute contempt. "I am trying to be realistic with you," he continued, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are a simple bookkeeper. You lack the ambition and the polish required to exist in the circles I am about to enter. When this promotion becomes official, things are going to be very different. I will be making major decisions about my future and my assets. You need to mentally prepare for changes. You need to accept that I cannot let anyone hold me back anymore." He was practically serving me the divorce papers right there in the bedroom. He was telling me that as soon as he secured his massive new salary and solidified his fraudulent post-nuptial agreement, he was going to abandon me. He thought he was intimidating me. He thought I was standing there terrified of losing the magnificent, successful man he had become. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent my morning sitting in a glass boardroom with his billionaire boss, charting the exact coordinates of his impending destruction. I did not argue with him. I did not shed a single tear or beg him to reconsider our marriage. I simply picked up his freshly ironed shirts and placed them neatly into his dresser drawer. I turned back to face him, keeping my posture relaxed and my voice entirely serene. "You are absolutely right, Trent," I said softly, holding his gaze. "You are about to step into a completely different world, and things are going to change forever. Do not worry about me holding you back. I am fully prepared for exactly what is coming." He smirked, clearly satisfied that he had cowed me into submission. He turned around and walked into the kitchen to pour himself a celebratory drink, leaving me alone in the bedroom. I closed the dresser drawer and smiled in the quiet shadows. The legal trap was locked. The financial noose was tight. The corporate stage was perfectly set. My husband thought he was walking into a coronation. He did not know he was actually dressing up for his own public execution. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy downpour. But inside our apartment, Trent was completely oblivious to the weather. He was standing in front of the scratched full-length mirror in our bedroom, adjusting the collar of his brand-new custom-tailored suit. He had spent the last 2 hours grooming himself with the meticulous care of a king preparing for a coronation. The air in the small room was thick with his expensive imported cologne. I sat on the edge of our faded mattress, folding a basket of laundry. I watched him brush an invisible speck of dust from his lapel. His reflection beamed with sheer toxic arrogance. Tonight was the Ashford Capital Shareholder Gala. It was the night he truly believed he would be crowned Vice President of Acquisitions. He turned away from the mirror and looked at me. His expression was a mixture of pity and absolute dismissal. "You understand why you cannot come tonight, right, Abigail?" he asked. His tone was not an apology. It was a command disguised as a simple question. "This event is strictly for top-tier executives and major shareholders. It is a highly sensitive corporate environment. If I brought a spouse who does not understand the nuances of high-level finance, it would distract from the professional image I need to project. Julian Ashford is going to make some very important announcements regarding my future. I need to be completely unburdened." I did not argue. I did not throw the laundry basket at him or demand to know why other executives were allowed to bring their wives. I simply smoothed the wrinkles out of a worn bath towel and offered him a soft, compliant smile. "I completely understand, Trent," I said, my voice perfectly even and meek. "You have worked so hard to get to this point. You should not have to worry about me being awkward or saying the wrong thing to your boss. This is your night to shine." He sighed loudly, visibly relieved that I was not going to put up a fight. He walked over to his dresser and picked up a heavy silk tie. It was a deep burgundy color one that I had purchased for him using my holiday bonus from the property management firm. He struggled with the knot for a moment, his fingers slipping on the smooth fabric. I stood up from the bed and walked over to him. "Let me help you with that," I said gently. I reached up and took the silk fabric in my hands. My knuckles were still swollen and aching from a long week of typing financial reports, but my movements were steady. I tied a perfect double Windsor knot, pulling it snug against his crisp white collar. I smoothed the fabric down his chest, flattening the suit jacket over his rapidly beating heart. He looked down at my hands and then up at my face. He actually smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "You have always been good at the little things, Abigail," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "You really are a reliable woman. It is a shame you do not have the drive to keep up with where I'm going. But do not worry. Once I secure this promotion, I will make sure you are taken care of. You just need to prepare yourself for the changes ahead." I patted his chest one last time. "I will be ready for the changes, Trent," I promised him. "I will be more ready than you could ever imagine." He grabbed his leather briefcase and walked out of the bedroom without giving me a goodbye kiss. I listened to his heavy footsteps echo down the hallway. I heard the front door open and slam shut. The deadbolt clicked into place. I stood in the center of the silent apartment and took a long, deep breath. The pathetic, exhausted bookkeeper he thought he had left behind vanished the exact second his car pulled out of the driveway. I walked over to my closet and pulled out a small overnight bag. I did not need to pack much because I was never coming back to this miserable apartment again. Exactly 45 minutes after Trent left, a heavy knock echoed through the quiet apartment. I opened the front door to find 3 towering men standing in the hallway. They wore immaculate dark suits and discreet earpieces. They were Julian Ashford's personal security detail. The lead guard, a massive man with kind eyes, handed me a large garment bag bearing the logo of an ultra-exclusive European designer. "Mr. Ashford sends his regards." "Ma'am," the guard said respectfully. "He wanted to ensure you had everything you needed for this evening. The car is waiting downstairs whenever you are ready." I took the heavy garment bag into the bedroom and laid it carefully on the mattress. I unzipped the thick protective cover. Inside was a gown that completely defied description. It was a breathtaking floor-length masterpiece crafted from midnight blue silk. The fabric caught the dim light of the bedroom and seemed to shimmer like the surface of a deep ocean. The bodice was structured and elegant, featuring delicate hand-stitched silver embroidery that perfectly matched the silver locket I still wore around my neck. Julian had specifically commissioned this $10,000 gown for me. It was not a dress meant to blend into the background. It was a garment designed to command absolute authority. It was the armor of an Ashford heir. I spent the next hour transforming myself. I washed away the grime and exhaustion of 6 years of double shifts. I arranged my hair into a sleek, sophisticated style. I applied a subtle but striking layer of makeup masking the dark circles under my eyes that Trent had caused. When I finally slipped the midnight blue silk over my shoulders and zipped it up, the fit was absolutely flawless. I stepped into a pair of gorgeous silver heels that Julian had included in the delivery. I looked at myself in the same scratched mirror Trent had used earlier. The woman looking back at me was a total stranger. She did not look tired. She did not look frightened. She radiated a cold, terrifying power. I reached up and clasped the silver locket securely around my throat, ensuring it rested perfectly against the dark silk. I grabbed a sleek silver clutch, holding the legal documents the corporate attorney had prepared for me. I walked out of the bedroom and locked the front door behind me, handing the apartment key to the building manager in the lobby. I slid into the spacious leather back seat of the waiting luxury town car. The security vehicles pulled out into the rainy Seattle night, escorting me toward the most public reckoning of my life. The Ashford Capital Shareholder Gala was being held at the grandest luxury hotel in the downtown financial district. The massive building took up an entire city block. As my town car approached the grand entrance, the sheer scale of the event became overwhelmingly apparent. High-powered searchlights swept across the rainy sky. A long red carpet stretched from the curb up the sweeping marble steps and through the towering brass doors. Dozens of valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open the doors of arriving limousines and sports cars. Wealthy investors, politicians, and elite corporate figures hurried out of the rain and into the glittering lobby. My driver pulled the heavy vehicle smoothly up to the curb, completely bypassing the long line of waiting cars. The 3 security guards immediately stepped out of their escort vehicle, forming a tight protective wall around my door. One of the guards opened the door and offered me his hand. I stepped out onto the red carpet. The cold night air hit my face, but I did not shiver. I felt completely insulated by the sheer magnitude of what I was about to do. We bypassed the crowded coat check and the bustling main lobby. The security detail led me toward a set of private elevators reserved specifically for the Ashford executive family. The doors slid open and we ascended to the grand ballroom on the top floor. The elevator ride was silent. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I thought about the $150,000 in fraudulent loans. I thought about the fake post-nuptial agreement. I thought about Trent standing in front of the mirror telling me I was too unpolished to be seen in public. The elevator bell chimed softly. The heavy steel doors glided apart. The grand ballroom was a vision of absolute staggering opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests. Tables draped in white velvet were adorned with towering arrangements of white roses and silver candelabras. Waiters wove through the crowd, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate appetizers. A full orchestra played on a raised platform near the back wall. The room hummed with the sound of clinking glass and the confident laughter of the city's most powerful people. My security detail stepped into the ballroom first, carving a wide, clear path through the dense crowd. I walked closely behind them. The midnight blue silk of my gown swept gracefully across the polished hardwood floor. As I moved deeper into the room, the conversations immediately surrounding me began to falter. People turned to look. They saw the formidable wall of security guards, and then they saw me. I kept my chin high and my posture perfectly straight. I did not look at the floor. I looked directly ahead, navigating the sea of bespoke suits and designer gowns with absolute ownership. I scanned the massive room, searching for one specific face. It did not take long. Near the front of the ballroom, close to the main presentation stage, stood my husband. Trent was holding a glass of scotch, throwing his head back in a loud, boisterous laugh. He was surrounded by a group of junior executives holding court as if he were already their superior. And standing directly by his side, her hand resting intimately on his forearm, was Savannah Hayes. The 24-year-old junior analyst was wearing a plunging red dress that left very little to the imagination. Her hair was styled in perfect cascading waves. She was looking up at Trent with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. They looked exactly like the wealthy, powerful power couple Trent had always desperately wanted to be. They were drinking expensive liquor financed by my stolen credit, completely oblivious to the shadow of ruin approaching them from across the room. I did not stop walking. The security guards parted the crowd like Moses parting the sea. As I drew closer, one of the executives in Trent's circle noticed the commotion. The man stopped laughing and nudged Trent, pointing a finger in my direction. Trent turned around, an annoyed expression on his face, clearly frustrated by the interruption. He looked at the security guards. Then his eyes shifted to me. The transformation on his face was spectacular. The smug, confident smile melted off his features, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His jaw literally dropped open. His eyes bulged wide as he took in the sight of my $10,000 gown, my flawless hair, and the formidable security presence flanking me on all sides. For a solid 10 seconds, he was completely paralyzed, unable to process how the tired, pathetic bookkeeper he had left in a dark apartment 2 hours ago was suddenly standing in the middle of a billionaire shareholder gala looking like royalty. Savannah noticed his sudden paralysis. She followed his gaze and looked at me. She frowned, her hand slipping off his arm as she realized the entire group of executives had gone completely silent. "Who is that?" Savannah asked, her voice carrying clearly over the soft orchestra music. "Why is she staring at you, Trent?" Trent finally snapped out of his trance. Panic, wild and primal, flooded his eyes. He slammed his crystal glass down onto a passing waiter's tray, spilling scotch over the side. He took 3 long, aggressive strides toward me, completely ignoring Savannah's question. He did not care that people were watching us now. The sheer terror of his impending professional destruction overrode his usual need for public decorum. He closed the distance, stopping just inches from my face. He tried to grab my elbow exactly like he had done in the parking lot of the country club weeks ago. But the lead security guard instantly stepped forward, blocking his hand with a massive, solid chest. Trent flinched, taking a quick step back, but his eyes remained locked on mine, filled with a venomous, panicked fury. "What in the world are you doing here, Abigail?" Trent hissed, his voice a frantic, terrified whisper. "Are you completely out of your mind? How did you get past the security downstairs? Where did you get that dress?" I looked at him. I did not shrink back. I did not lower my eyes. I met his furious gaze with a cold, terrifying calm. "I was invited, Trent," I said smoothly, my voice loud enough for the nearby executives to hear. "I thought a wife should always be present to support her husband during a major career milestone." "You need to leave right now," he demanded, stepping closer to the security guard, trying to intimidate me through the human wall. "I told you this morning that this event is highly sensitive. You are going to ruin everything. Julian Ashford is going to take the stage in 5 minutes. If he sees you sneaking in here looking like some desperate party crasher, he will fire me on the spot. Get out of this ballroom before you destroy my entire life." Savannah walked up behind him, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down with a sneer of pure disdain. "Trent, who is this woman?" she asked, her tone sharp and territorial. "Is she bothering you? Do we need to call management to have her escorted out?" Trent whipped his head around, his face shining with cold sweat. "No, Savannah. Just give me a second to handle this," he pleaded. He turned his desperate, sweating face back to me. "Abigail, I am begging you. Turn around and walk out those doors. Go back to the apartment. If you leave right now, I will forget this ever happened. If you stay and embarrass me in front of the board of directors, I swear to you I will file for divorce tomorrow morning and leave you with absolutely nothing." He was using his ultimate weapon. He was threatening me with the financial ruin he thought he had so perfectly engineered. He thought the fear of being buried under $150,000 of debt would force me to turn around and run away in tears. He truly believed he was still holding the leash. I smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that caused a visible shiver to run down Trent's spine. I looked from his sweating, terrified face to Savannah's confused, arrogant glare. I reached up and adjusted the heavy silver locket resting against the dark blue silk of my gown. "You do not need to worry about embarrassing yourself, Trent," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority. "And you definitely do not need to worry about filing for divorce. I have already taken care of all the paperwork for you." Before Trent could process the terrifying weight of my words, the heavy velvet curtains at the front of the grand ballroom parted. The low hum of the crowd instantly died away. The massive spotlights shifted, illuminating the mahogany podium at the center of the stage. Julian Ashford stepped out into the blinding light, his silver hair gleaming, his posture radiating absolute ultimate power. The billionaire tapped the microphone, and the entire room held its breath, waiting for the announcement that would tear Trent's perfectly fabricated world into 1,000 burning pieces. The air in the grand ballroom felt heavy and suffocating as the massive velvet curtains finally parted. The gentle hum of elite conversation instantly died away, replaced by an absolute breathless silence. Hundreds of the most powerful corporate figures in the city turned their attention toward the elevated stage. I stood perfectly still near the back of the room, surrounded by the solid, intimidating wall of my grandfather's private security team. The midnight blue silk of my custom gown brushed against my legs, and the heavy silver locket rested like a badge of honor against my throat. Across the vast sea of tables and glittering chandeliers, I could see Trent. He was practically vibrating with manic anticipation. He was leaning forward, smoothing the lapels of his suit, completely convinced that the next words spoken into the microphone would elevate him to a position of untouchable corporate power. Julian Ashford stepped up to the mahogany podium. The bright stage lights illuminated his silver hair and the sharp, uncompromising lines of his face. He possessed a kind of raw gravity that commanded total obedience from every person in the room. He adjusted the microphone and looked out over the crowd. He did not smile. He began to speak about the foundation of Ashford Capital. He talked about integrity and the sacred trust placed in those who manage immense wealth. But then his voice shifted, dropping into a deeply personal, emotional register. He told the audience that true legacy is not defined by profit margins or aggressive acquisitions. He said that a true legacy is built entirely on family, on bloodlines, and on the absolute truth. Trent nudged the young woman standing beside him. Savannah Hayes looked up at my husband with adoring eyes. I watched Trent whisper something in her ear, entirely certain that Julian was building up to a dramatic announcement about his new vice president. Trent was so blinded by his monumental ego that he could not sense the trap snapping shut right above his head. Julian gripped the edges of the podium. His voice carried a profound, raw grief as he explained that for 27 years he had carried an unbearable burden. He spoke about his beloved son David and the tragic, devastating accident that had taken his life. He told the silent, captivated audience about the subsequent disappearance of his infant granddaughter. He described spending decades and millions of dollars searching through the foster system, hitting dead ends, and enduring endless, heartbreaking failures. Women in the front rows were quietly dabbing their eyes. The wealthy investors listened in complete, stunned silence as the famously ruthless billionaire exposed his deepest open wound. Then Julian raised his head, and his piercing blue eyes searched the crowd until they locked directly onto mine. He told the audience that miracles do exist. He announced that his long, agonizing search was finally over. He declared that he had not only found his missing granddaughter, but that she was standing in this very ballroom tonight. The entire room gasped collectively. A massive wave of frantic whispers washed over the tables as guests turned their heads, desperately trying to spot the hidden heir. Trent frowned, looking around with profound confusion. The script playing in his head was completely derailed. He did not understand why his boss was wasting time talking about a lost family member when his promotion was supposed to be the main event. Julian raised his hand and pointed straight toward the back of the room. He spoke clearly and deliberately, ensuring every single syllable echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He introduced me to the world not as an exhausted bookkeeper or a disposable wife, but as Abigail Ashford, the sole living heir to the Ashford capital empire. The heavy spotlights instantly swung away from the stage and illuminated my position. Hundreds of heads swiveled toward me. The collective shock of the crowd was deafening, but I kept my eyes focused entirely on my husband. The physical reaction of Trent Preston was something I will savor for the rest of my life. The smug, arrogant certainty literally melted off his features. His jaw dropped wide open. His eyes bulged in pure, unadulterated terror as he took in the sight of my $10,000 gown, the flawless styling, and the massive security detail treating me like royalty. He stared at the silver locket resting against my chest, and I watched his brain desperately try to process the catastrophic failure of his reality. The woman he had abused, overworked, and tried to financially enslave was the granddaughter of the billionaire he worshipped. But Julian Ashford was absolutely not finished. The public execution had only just begun. Julian turned back to the microphone, and his tone turned instantly to ice. He told the terrified audience that when you find something incredibly precious, you must do everything in your power to protect it. He declared that protecting his family meant completely cleansing his own corporate house. He reached into his tuxedo jacket, pulled out a small remote control, and pressed a button. A massive digital screen descended smoothly from the ceiling directly behind the podium. The screen flared to life, displaying a glaringly bright, highly detailed spreadsheet. It was the exact forensic audit report my legal team had compiled earlier that week. Julian stated that Ashford Capital demanded absolute integrity from every single employee. He announced that a recent internal audit had uncovered a deeply disturbing pattern of extreme financial fraud and gross corporate embezzlement operating right under his nose. Trent began to hyperventilate. I could see his chest heaving violently under his expensive shirt. He took a stumbling, frantic step backward, bumping directly into Savannah. His eyes darted wildly around the ballroom, searching for an exit, but the doors were already sealed shut by Julian's private security force. There was absolutely nowhere to run. Julian pointed to the massive screen. He walked the board of directors and the elite guests through the exact mechanics of Trent's crimes. He announced my husband's full name, letting it hang in the elegant space like a filthy curse. Julian explained exactly how Trent had stolen the social security number of his own innocent wife to secure $150,000 in fraudulent secret bank loans. He traced the money path perfectly, showing the entire crowd how the stolen funds were funneled into a hidden illegal shell company called Apex Consulting. The murmurs in the crowd turned hostile and disgusted. The senior partners who had been shaking Trent's hand an hour ago were now glaring at him with sheer contempt. In their world, stealing is a crime, but getting caught so stupidly is an unforgivable sin. Trent was completely ruined in this city, and he knew it. Julian clicked the remote again, and the slide changed. It displayed the property deed for a luxury condominium in the Pearl District and the registration documents for a brand new pearl white Mercedes-Benz. Julian spoke with a lethal quiet intensity, revealing that the embezzled funds were not used for business. He told the crowd that Trent had used the stolen money to purchase a secret luxury lifestyle for his mistress. Julian delivered the final crushing blow. He announced that the mistress in question was a 24-year-old junior analyst currently employed in the acquisitions department. He turned his head and looked directly at Savannah Hayes. The entire ballroom turned to stare at the young woman in the plunging red dress standing beside my husband. Savannah let out a sharp, horrified gasp. Her face flushed a deep, violent crimson. The older corporate wives openly sneered at her, pointing their manicured fingers. Savannah realized in a terrifying split second that her career, her reputation, and her future were entirely obliterated. She took a massive step away from Trent, treating him like a deadly, contagious disease. She turned and practically ran toward the back of the room, pushing desperately through the crowd to escape the glaring, humiliating spotlight. Trent reached out to grab her, but his hand closed on empty air. Julian leaned into the microphone. He looked at Trent with pure icy contempt. He announced that Trent was officially fired from Ashford Capital, effective immediately. He stated that all relevant evidence had already been surrendered to federal authorities and a full criminal investigation was currently active. Julian finished by calling Trent a pathetic coward who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating an Ashford. The silence that followed the speech was absolute. Trent stood completely isolated in the middle of the ballroom. The guests had backed away, forming a wide, empty circle around him. He was sweating profusely and his custom suit looked suddenly wrinkled and cheap. He looked around at the glaring faces of the elite society he had tried so hard to infiltrate. They were looking at him like he was garbage on the bottom of their shoes. Then Trent's eyes found me again. His parasitic survival instinct kicked into overdrive. He made a totally irrational, deeply insane calculation. He realized his job was gone and his mistress had fled, but his twisted mind told him that his forged post-nuptial agreement might still hold up in court. He thought if he could just play the role of the devoted, apologetic husband, he could still salvage his access to the billionaire empire. He stumbled forward, pushing past the disgusted guests until he reached the edge of my security detail. He stopped just inches away, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a frantic, manic desperation. He completely ignored the reality of his massive public exposure. He forced a pathetic, trembling smile onto his face and tried to sound loving. "Abigail," he pleaded, his voice cracking wildly. "Honey, please tell them there is a misunderstanding. I did all of those things for us. I was trying to build a beautiful future for our family. Do you understand what this means, honey? We are rich. We do not have to worry about anything ever again. We can finally have the life we always wanted." I looked at the man I had spent my 20s supporting. I looked at the man who had mocked my exhaustion and plotted to enslave me under a mountain of fraudulent debt. He was small and sweaty and entirely broken. I felt absolutely no pity for him. I felt only the clean, sharp sensation of total liberation. I gestured to the lead security guard. The massive man stepped aside just enough to allow Trent to step closer to me. The entire ballroom watched in rapt, silent fascination, waiting to see what the newly crowned heiress would do to the man who betrayed her. I calmly reached into my sleek silver clutch. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I spoke in a clear, steady tone that carried effortlessly through the quiet room. Trent expected me to yell or cry. Instead, I handed him the thick folder, pressing it firmly against his chest. Trent took the folder with shaking hands. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a terrified whisper. I looked him directly in the eyes, ensuring everyone nearby could hear my words. I explained that the top document was a formal petition for divorce citing extreme financial abuse and infidelity. I told him the second document was a sworn affidavit from a federal handwriting expert proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that his precious post-nuptial agreement was a complete legal forgery. I watched his eyes widen in fresh horror as his ultimate trap was completely dismantled. Finally, I told him that the last document was a notification from the Bank Fraud Division. I explained that my legal team had successfully severed my name from his hidden limited liability company. The $150,000 in high-interest debt was now resting squarely and exclusively on his personal credit profile. He was entirely responsible for paying back the money he had stolen to finance his mistress's luxury lifestyle. Trent began to shake violently. The folder slipped from his sweaty fingers and hit the polished hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The divorce papers spilled out, stopping near his scuffed shoes. He tried to speak, but his throat was completely dry. He just opened and closed his mouth like a suffocating fish, realizing he had absolutely no leverage, no money, no job, and no future. I did not offer him a polite smile or an ounce of comfort. I stood tall in my midnight blue gown and delivered the final devastating truth of the evening. "I am rich, Trent," I said cleanly, my voice echoing with finality. "You are just unemployed and indicted." The heavy oak and brass doors of the grand ballroom swung shut with a thick, resonant thud. That single sound marked the absolute definitive end of Trent Preston. I stood near the mahogany podium bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights and watched through the clear glass panels as my grandfather's security team marched my soon-to-be ex-husband down the long carpeted corridor. Trent did not go quietly, but he did not have the physical leverage to fight back. Two massive guards gripped his upper arm, steering him toward the service elevators. He dragged his expensive leather shoes against the polished floor, desperately trying to look back to catch the eye of anyone who might intervene. No one did. The corporate elite, the senior partners, the investors he had spent an entire year worshipping, all simply turned their backs and went back to their expensive champagne. They erased his very existence from their collective memory before he even reached the ground floor lobby. Down on the street, the unrelenting Seattle rain was coming down in freezing gray sheets. Trent was shoved out the back service exit of the luxury hotel, completely bypassing the glamorous red carpet he had glided across just hours earlier. He stumbled onto the wet concrete, his custom-tailored burgundy suit instantly soaking through. He frantically pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He dialed Savannah Hayes. He desperately needed his backup plan. He needed the beautiful 24-year-old junior analyst to validate him, to tell him they would fight this vicious misunderstanding together from their luxury downtown condominium. He spotted her standing under the bright awning of a high-end coffee shop across the street, desperately trying to hail a premium rideshare. Trent ran across the wet asphalt, dodging oncoming traffic and shouting her name. Savannah turned, and the look on her flawless face was one of absolute total revulsion. Trent reached out to grab her shoulders, babbling wildly about how they still had each other, how they still had the Pearl District condo and the pearl white Mercedes. Savannah stepped back aggressively, slapping his wet hands away. She looked at him with the cold, calculating eyes of a predator who had just realized her meal was made of plastic. She pulled up an email on her phone and shoved the glowing screen directly into his face. It was an emergency notification from the property management company that oversaw the condo. The lease had been flagged for massive bank fraud, and residential access was permanently revoked. Furthermore, the tracking system on the Mercedes had already been activated by the recovery team my lawyers dispatched earlier that afternoon. Savannah did not shed a single tear for him. She did not offer a single word of comfort. She simply told Trent that he was a pathetic broke fraud who had ruined her early career. She told him to never contact her again unless he wanted a restraining order. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. Savannah climbed into the dry, warm interior and slammed the heavy door without looking back. The tires kicked up a wave of dirty street water, splashing directly across Trent's polished Italian leather shoes. He was left completely alone, shivering in the freezing rain with no money, no home, and no allies. The following weeks brought a level of absolute legal destruction that was almost breathtaking to witness. Trent tried to return to our cramped apartment, but my lawyers had already terminated the month-to-month lease and paid the landlord to change the locks. All of Trent's cheap personal belongings had been unceremoniously packed into cardboard boxes and left in a damp, secure storage unit across town. But the loss of his housing was the absolute least of his rapidly multiplying problems. The $150,000 in fraudulent secret loans he had taken out using my Social Security number were now resting entirely on his own shoulders. My forensic accounting team had flawlessly severed my identity from his illicit shell company, Apex Consulting. The banking institutions immediately accelerated the debt, demanding full and immediate repayment due to the fraudulent nature of the original loan applications. Because Trent had funneled the cash into non-liquid assets that were now seized by the authorities, he had absolutely zero capital to satisfy the banks. He frantically tried calling his old golf buddies, begging for loans, but the moment they heard about the fraud allegations, they blocked his number. Even Gregory Vance, the corrupt notary who had stamped the fake post-nuptial agreement, immediately flipped on Trent to save his own license, cooperating fully with the state investigators. The aggressive daily phone calls and towering piles of past due notices completely crushed my ex-husband. Then the federal authorities moved in. Armed with the meticulous paper trail I had provided, the Financial Fraud Division secured a rapid grand jury indictment. Federal agents found Trent sleeping on a stained mattress in a cheap motel by the interstate highway. They arrested him for massive corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. He tried to hire a high-powered defense attorney, but the moment the law firms ran a credit check and saw his frozen assets, they refused to take his calls. The arrogant man who once demanded I iron his shirt so he could play the corporate king was ultimately forced to stand in a sterile federal courtroom wearing a wrinkled orange jumpsuit represented by an overworked public defender who could barely remember his name. He was facing up to 20 years in federal prison. The heavy iron anvil he had so carefully crafted to drop on my head had swung back and pinned him securely to the floor. He was completely mathematically ruined. While Trent descended into the dark, inevitable consequences of his own greed, my life expanded into a brilliant new dawn. I did not return to the auto dealership to scrub ledgers for minimum wage. I did not return to a freezing apartment filled with anxiety and unpaid utility bills. Instead, Julian Ashford brought me home. The Ashford family estate was a sprawling historic property located on the edge of a pristine blue lake surrounded by towering ancient evergreen trees. The massive stone mansion was a masterpiece of classic architecture with tall sweeping windows and perfectly manicured lush gardens. When Julian led me through the towering double front doors, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over my tired bones. The house was quiet, but it was not lonely or empty. It was filled with warmth, with the smell of roasted coffee and fresh cedar, with the gentle ticking of antique grandfather clocks. Julian gave me a breathtaking suite in the east wing of the estate. The bedroom was larger than my entire previous apartment. It featured a massive 4-poster bed, a private stone balcony overlooking the water, and a walk-in closet filled with elegant, tailored clothing Julian had personally selected for me. I woke up the first morning wrapped in expensive, heavy linen, completely disoriented by the sheer immense comfort of my surroundings. I walked out onto the balcony and watched the morning mist roll across the calm lake. For the first time in 28 years, my shoulders dropped. The constant, suffocating weight of basic survival was finally gone. I was entirely safe. I was finally home. But I was not content to simply sit in a beautiful mansion and play the role of an idle, wealthy heiress. I had spent my entire adult life working harder than anyone else in the room, and I possessed a brilliant analytical mind that had been forged in the fires of endless, exhausting double shifts. I wanted to actively earn my place in the Ashford legacy. 2 weeks after the gala, I walked into the soaring glass lobby of Ashford Capital. I did not enter through the service doors, and I did not wear a cheap gray uniform. I wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit and carried my own premium leather briefcase. Julian introduced me to the executive board not just as his newly discovered granddaughter, but as the new director of internal auditing. Some of the older partners looked at me with polite skepticism, wondering if I was just a beneficiary of extreme nepotism. I completely destroyed their doubts within my very first week. I sat down with the massive, complex financial ledgers of the firm. I used the exact same gritty, relentless forensic bookkeeping skills that had allowed me to dismantle Trent's fraudulent shell company. I found deep structural inefficiencies that the senior accountants had missed for over 5 years. During a major meeting regarding a complex European acquisition, I caught a massive currency valuation error buried in the appendix of the contract, saving the firm millions of dollars in wasted operational costs. The room fell silent as I pointed out the discrepancy, and from that moment on, the skepticism vanished entirely. I did not command respect because of my famous last name. I commanded absolute respect because I was undeniably brilliant at my job. I worked side by side with Julian, learning the intricate nuances of global finance and elite corporate strategy. He was a tough, highly demanding mentor, but he was also incredibly patient and profoundly proud. Every time I presented a flawless audit report or navigated a difficult board meeting, I saw his blue eyes shine with deep paternal love. He saw his bright son David in me, and together we were slowly healing a devastating family wound that had been bleeding for nearly 3 decades. As the busy months passed, the dark traumatic memories of my previous life began to fade into a distant, dull echo. Trent Preston became nothing more than a cautionary tale, a minor pathetic footnote in the history of my rapid rise. He eventually took a cowardly plea deal to avoid a lengthy public trial, receiving a harsh, strict sentence in a federal penitentiary. I did not attend his final sentencing hearing. I did not care to see him in handcuffs again. I was far too busy building a global financial portfolio and managing a massive charitable foundation Julian and I had established to directly help vulnerable children navigating the foster care system. I often pause and think about the woman I used to be. The quiet woman who practiced holding a plastic water bottle so her exhausted hands would not shake. The woman who quietly accepted the miserable role of a burden, the invisible staff member, the reliable, uncomplaining workhorse. I think about how much vital energy it took to constantly shrink myself to fit into a tiny, restrictive box, just so a highly mediocre man could feel massive. The greatest luxury of extreme wealth is not the custom silk gowns or the sprawling lakeside estates. The greatest absolute luxury is the complete emotional freedom to finally expand to your full true size. I no longer apologize for being smart. I no longer quiet my voice to make someone else feel comfortable. I walk into massive boardrooms filled with the most powerful, ambitious men in the city, and I firmly hold their gaze. I speak with clear, undeniable authority, and I know with absolute certainty that I belong exactly where I'm standing. If you are listening to this right now, and you find yourself constantly shrinking to accommodate the fragile ego of someone who refuses to see your true, immense value, I want you to hear my words. Do not let anyone convince you that you are small. Do not let anyone steal your brilliant light, or forge your future, or tell you that you are merely lucky just to be allowed in the room. You have the absolute right to claim your space. You have the right to demand complete respect. And if the people around you cannot handle the full, brilliant weight of your potential, then it is time to leave them standing in the freezing rain while you walk confidently into the empire you deserve. Thank you so much for staying with me through this incredible journey. If you felt a deep connection to my story and believe in the power of standing up for your own undeniable worth, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I would absolutely love to know where my story reached you today, so please leave a comment telling me your beautiful city and the exact time you are watching this video. Your wonderful support means the absolute world to me. Always remember to never settle for the cold shadows when you were born to own the entire room. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next story. Looking out over the calm, mirrored surface of the lake from the private stone balcony of my new home, I often find myself reflecting on the profound, turbulent journey that finally brought me here. For so many years, I lived under the heavy, crushing weight of a devastating illusion. I genuinely believed that if I just sacrificed enough, if I worked hard enough, and if I made myself small enough, I would eventually earn my rightful place in my marriage. I thought that by pouring every ounce of my energy into Trent, I was building a solid foundation for our shared future. I convinced myself that true love meant silencing my own needs so his ambitions could take center stage. I accepted the late nights, the aching hands, and the constant quiet disrespect because society often teaches us that endless endurance is the ultimate virtue. We are told to keep our heads down, to weather the storm, and to support our partners without asking for a single thing in return. But standing on the other side of that nightmare, looking at the ashes of the life I left behind, I can tell you with absolute unshakable certainty that this is a dangerous, toxic lie. A partner who demands you hide your light does not love you. They do not cherish your brilliant spirit or value your immense contributions. They are simply using your shadow to hide their own glaring flaws. Trent was an empty, shallow shell of a man deeply insecure and entirely dependent on the false illusion of his own superiority. He needed me to be perpetually exhausted. He needed me to feel completely unworthy. He needed me to stay entirely ignorant of my own potential, because my smallness was the only thing that made him feel big. People like him do not want an equal partner to share the beautiful journey of life. They want a stepping stone to trample on their ruthless climb to the top. They drain your resources, your precious youth, and your self-esteem to build a golden pedestal for themselves. And the exact moment they feel secure, they will not hesitate to kick you away into the cold rain. I know that many of you watching this video right now understand exactly what I'm talking about. You have lived through decades of putting everyone else first. You have sacrificed your own bold dreams to raise families, support spouses, and keep the peace in homes where your vital voice was rarely heard or valued. You have swallowed your pride and hidden your magnificent talents because you were afraid that shining too brightly would threaten the fragile, brittle egos around you. You have poured your beautiful heart into people who took your devotion entirely for granted, treating your endless sacrifices as if they were merely your basic daily obligations. It is a profoundly painful, isolating experience to wake up one day and realize that the person you gave your very best years to was actively plotting to keep you locked in the dark. But I want you to listen to me very carefully right now. It is absolutely never too late to stop apologizing for your existence. It does not matter if you are 30, 50, or 80 years old. The moment you finally recognize your own inherent, undeniable value is the moment you reclaim the pen and start writing the rest of your own glorious story. You do not need a miraculous financial inheritance or a long-lost billionaire grandfather to take back your power. You only need the quiet, fierce courage to look at the toxic people who are holding you down and firmly say that you have had enough. Your true worth is not determined by how much emotional abuse you can quietly tolerate. Your value is absolutely not measured by your ability to endure disrespect with a polite smile. You possess a unique, brilliant light that deserves to be seen and celebrated by the entire world. When I finally stopped shrinking to fit into Trent's pathetic, narrow definition of who I should be, my entire universe expanded. I learned that true, deep peace does not come from appeasing manipulative people. True peace comes from walking into any room and knowing with absolute unshakable certainty that you belong exactly where you are standing. I no longer tiptoe around fragile men who cannot handle an intelligent, capable woman. I no longer hide my sharp mind or downplay my massive success to make others feel comfortable in my presence. I embrace every single part of my complex identity, the lonely foster child, the exhausted, relentless bookkeeper, and the powerful corporate leader, because all of those difficult experiences forged the unbreakable titanium core of the proud woman I am today. We must collectively break the cycle of silent suffering. We must teach ourselves and the wonderful generations that follow us that demanding respect is never an act of selfishness. It is a basic, fundamental requirement for a healthy, authentic life. If someone makes you feel like your personality is too much, or your voice is too loud, it simply means they are not nearly enough for you. Let them find someone else to manipulate and control. You have a magnificent empire of your own to build, whether that empire is a thriving global business, a peaceful, loving home, or simply a quiet life lived entirely on your own joyful terms. We are building a beautiful, strong community here of people who have survived the shadows and decided to step fully and bravely into the light. If you have ever had to reclaim your identity from someone who desperately tried to erase it, I want you to go down to the comments section right now and type the words, "I am enough." Type it like a solemn promise to yourself. Type it as a powerful reminder that your beautiful light can never truly be extinguished by someone else's darkness. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you truly believe that the truth always comes to light and that sweet justice always finds its way to those who deserve it, I absolutely love reading your messages and connecting with all of you wonderful, strong people from across the globe. Let me know exactly where you are watching from today and what time it is there in your part of the world. Sharing our stories and our locations reminds us that we are never truly alone in our struggles. We are a massive global family of survivors supporting each other every single day. Until next time, please remember to stand tall, speak your absolute truth, and never ever apologize for taking up the space you so richly deserve.